Cool.
Okay. Looks like we're live. I think. Yes. Okay. Hello,
Let's
Dylan.
get good at. Hello, Andrew. I like the title. Let's get good at PLO. It's so wholesome.
All right. For anyone watching later on, hello. Thanks for tuning in. Just going to slowly ease into this here as people slowly arrive to the stream. Looks like we have people that have already arrived. So, hello, Jamin Burton, first in the chat. Look at that. The legend, Jamin Burton. You'll have to, you guys, I don't think have met yet. You'll have to cross paths. A couple of my favorite people here in Vegas, Dylan Weisman,
Oh yeah.
Jamin Burton.
I love to meet good people, and I trust your taste in humans, Andrew. You've seen a lot of them in your life.
Yes, I have. Kobe Johnson, Lumber 44, Daniel Hobson, Johnny Shelley, Nick Jarris. What's up, guys? Okay, we're gonna fire up some Pot Limit Omaha hands from various blogs that I posted on my channel. So we've done this sort of a thing a couple different times. Usually it's all been hands that I played from an online session that I don't think were posted on my channel previously. This, if you're a regular viewer to the channel, you'll see some hands that you've seen before, but I think all of those hands were just my thoughts. They were things that, you know, I was thinking at the time mixed with some afterthoughts. But, you know, obviously even those afterthoughts are not going to be the most, you know, GTO. And what do you know? We have Dr. GTO here in the house. See how I did that? That was great.
Every time I hear that nickname, it still is like weird to my body. Like I get a physical, like, this is weird, kind of like whenever somebody calls me that still, but I'll take it. I'll definitely take it.
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, this is Dylan Weisman, who is the PLO coach at Upswing Poker. He's the man. He's got a couple of different courses on Upswing. There is the Launchpad course, which you've definitely heard me talk about before. And for those of you who are newer to PLO, that's going to be the one that's going to be most interesting to you guys. I've gone through it, the entire thing. There's only, is it 9 hours of content, Dylan? Is that correct?
Yeah, 9 hours, and it's very digestible, like like short video lengths, easy to get through.
Yeah, I mean, digestible is definitely the key word there. And you're going to want to watch some of those videos more than once, of course, but Dylan has a way with just teaching and making concepts digestible, like you said. I am curious about that. Do you think how do you think you arrived at this this skill of yours? Where, I mean, I've heard like other people, you know, I've gone on a bunch of meetup games since we started working together, and I talked to a lot of people about poker and Pot Limit Omaha and stuff, and people that have seen the videos and the streams that we've done together, and they just agree with me. And you know, when I say like this guy, he just has a way of like breaking down these concepts in a complicated game that makes it easily understandable.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you for those words. So I think that there's two things that come into being a good teacher. And I actually learned the first one of these from a teacher that I really respect, which is that your job as a teacher is to, like, for lack of a better term, be of service to the people that you're teaching. So you need to be able to show up and be receptive and teach to the people you're teaching to. So a lot of really intelligent people sometimes have trouble with teaching because they are communicating concepts to someone of their skill level, or maybe slightly different than their skill level. And I think that's something I try very hard to do in teaching, is trying to communicate in the most efficient and simple way possible, no matter what the concept is. And I think that goes into the second point that's really important, in that in order to teach something well, you must understand it very well. I think that this was an Einstein quote, or like a paraphrase, where he was saying that the best teachers are those who can understand all of the different levels, because then you can teach to all the different levels of understanding. And specifically for a game like PLO, I've been a teacher. Like, I started tutoring when I was in 6th grade, literally math, and I've taught a bunch of different things in my life, but I didn't feel comfortable teaching poker until a little over 2 years ago, because I hadn't actually, from my perspective, put in enough work to know the concepts in and out in a way that would allow me to communicate them effectively and concisely. And so once I really started putting in the deep sim work, that's, I think, where a lot of the more nuanced understanding comes from, because not only do you have the correct answer, but you know why you're getting the correct answer, and you kind of can deconstruct how to get there from the ground up. And that's when I really started coaching poker more, because it felt comfortable to teach, because I knew that I was giving people the correct information, because nowadays we actually have, which is one of the craziest things in poker. For decades, people have been teaching poker and nobody actually had a consensus on what the right answer was. But nowadays we do.
Yeah.
And so
Imagine all that coaching, just people thinking they're teaching something based on what they just hope or assume is right.
Yeah, totally. That's crazy. And it's funny looking back at old content, because there's some stuff that still holds up. Like there are some concepts that we have a better understanding of, but that people are teaching 5-10 years ago. And then there's some things that are just absolutely awful, like god awful, atrocious. Like it's like there's when I was on Moneymaker stream, he was saying that there's like a Sammy Farha on PLO book, and I'm trying to get him to send it to me, because I really want to just like read through it in like a bedtime stories way to my streams. Like, this is what Sammy Farha thinks you should do.
There's got to be a lot of gems in there.
Oh yeah, for sure. 100%. But yeah,
All
thank
right.
you for that question.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we before we started the stream, we were talking a little bit about variance.
Yeah.
So yeah, I messaged Dylan. So like in between right now and then I think there's been a bunch of the meetup games and stuff. I was in Texas for a week and then came back here, and there's another meetup game. So I haven't had a ton of time to find for Pot Limit Omaha sessions, but I think like there probably was a little more time, but one of the more recent sessions that I played online got whacked. So both, I'm sure, like both due to my own mistakes as well as the variance of it all, and also just like there's different kinds of variance. Just like running into tougher spots is a form of variance, I think, and just like runouts and all sorts of stuff. But how do you, Dylan, handle things when like everything, you have one of those sessions where just everything goes against you? And in PLO, they could be pretty brutal, right? It's such a swinging game. It's like, I don't know what the average number of buy-ins,
standard deviation.
Standard deviation, how like the average swing size in Pot Limit Omaha comparison to limit. Obviously it's wider, but like winning or losing 10 buy-ins in a PLO session is kind of standard. It's like totally. It happens. Yeah. So how do you you can do things that are, there's a lot of things that people would guess, take a little bit of a break, clear your head, do something non-poker related, get some exercise, all those things. I'm sure you do a bunch of those things. But how do you not go to the next session with like, well, I hope I don't lose another 10 buy-ins, which is like a bad starting point.
Totally. And I actually want to start on that last thing you said, which is the session after a really gnarly session. We so often, like, our bodies haven't calmed down from that shitty session the first time. We are still in a neurologically activated space where our bodies are still freaking out because of how bad of a session that we had. And something that's really important to be able to do is have an awareness of yourself. And this is true for any poker session, but especially true in sessions where you're hitting some intense negative variance, is to have an awareness of what your responses are to that negative variance, and be able to either gate or create systems so that when you do hit those really intense variance patches, that it doesn't stay with you, right? That it doesn't turn itself into a prolonged downswing, or you don't get yourself into like a quote unquote downswing headspace, which is kind of what I call it. And so the first thing that I would say is, for those bad sessions, is to have in the advanced course, I have a little bit of a mental game section, which we call professional fundamentals. And in my tilting video, I have are you tilted checklist. And so I personally know what my own symptoms of tilt are. Like if I'm counting my stack, let's say I'm playing live and I'm like continuously counting my stack, that was a huge thing. And the online equivalent would be checking the balance that you have in your online account. If I'm doing those two things in the middle of a session, I'm probably tilted or starting to tilt, right? Like it's one of the early indicators that I'm tilting. And so I have a couple techniques that I will do that are specific to me that I'll kind of help calm my body down, like a couple breathwork techniques, which I'm not going to get into on here, but I find very helpful for poker specifically. Other things you can do is like get up and go on a 2-minute walk, especially if you're playing online. If you find yourself starting to get tilted, like just getting up physically away from the computer screen for 2 minutes does a world of difference. Because a lot of the times what will end up happening is that you were so deep in like a tilt spiral that you wouldn't let yourself get up because you knew that if you got up, you'd realize you were tilting super badly. And then you
Right.
quote unquote wouldn't let yourself get unstuck. This is something that happens very often where it's like our it's like our prefrontal cortex, I'm pretty sure, is what modulates our logic. And when that's firing super hard, you're literally not thinking logically anymore. You're acting purely based off of emotion. And one emotion that as humans happens a lot in poker is I want to get unstuck because we have this feeling of not wanting to end in discomfort or end in a loss. And so by getting up from the table, it doesn't let you cheat yourself into continuing to play while you're tilted. And that to me is a really important thing as well. And so if I've done a good job of all of these things, even if I get smashed in the face, I'm not going like I try to redefine during those sessions what success means. Because in those sessions, success is not making money. In those sessions, success is not allowing your body to get wrecked because of how much like because getting destroyed in poker is physically hard. Like I've lost for months straight at a time and it feels bad on my body. And especially when you're playing higher stakes and like let's say playing heads up against an aggressive opponent, you can literally swing 20 like 10 to 20 buy-ins in 30 to 60 minutes. I've had that happen a countless amount of times in aggressive dynamics. And so your job in those situations is obviously to play the best that you can, but also to have an awareness to know whether or not you're starting to tilt. And then also be able to build out a system so that if you do identify that you're starting to tilt or you're kind of on the fringe of it, that you know how to effectively navigate that space.
Awesome. Always awesome to get into your head. Thanks for the super chats, guys. I saw Ben Adler, I saw Jamin Burton having their back and forth, and of course, on it dropping the $50 bomb as he does on many of the live streams. Much appreciated. We'll come back to your.
I want to ask that question back to you, actually. What did it feel like when you were tilting? Like what are your signs of tilt? Like if you had an am I tilted checklist, what would show up there?
It would be fun to have like some sort of like a body thermometer on me because I'm sure I get like literally
Totally.
heated.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it just feels like kind of like tunnel vision a little bit, just like I don't know. It's I think it's a little bit tough to describe, but I feel like I'm probably like clicking much faster on average. Just yeah, not taking as much time with decisions, and generally annoyed at life and everything, the universe.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like when you're tilted, everything tilts you.
Yep.
It's like it's being tilted is for sure a headspace, right? It's not just about the game itself. It's an emotional response that we're having to. It's like there's a definition of suffering that I love that I was taught this by like a Buddhist teacher dude when I was traveling, and he was saying suffering is when your wants for reality and your actual reality are not the same. And I think that that's why when we're losing, it's so easy to feel like we're
Sure.
suffering and tilted because we don't
Sure.
want to be losing, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah,
Sure.
I really like that definition.
All right. On it, I took a photo of your question. I will come back to it. I think the people are in need of some hands here. So why don't we fire up
Yep, love
the
to.
video here? So this is from a recent one. I think we kind of go like back in time. Like this is going to be the most recent video that I posted. And so we'll go like in reverse chronological order through these hands. But let's just fire it up. Dylan's got the controls, which should make it easier. So he can just hit play. We can listen to what I was, narrating in the video, and then he can give thoughts on my thoughts as well as what's going on in the hand. So fire away.
Perfect. I'm also stoked to hear how your thoughts have changed if we're going in reverse chronological order.
Yeah. I cannot hear the audio on the video.
It's about to. You cannot hear the chat. Can you hear the audio on the video? Yay or nay? Give us a yes or no. Let me see.
Hit play again real quick, just for a couple seconds. Yeah, I don't hear anything.
Interesting. Okay.
Give us 1 second here. Chat.
Okay, well, let's pull it. All right. Rob, come to the rescue.
we have an audio visual expert that helped us get the stream set up today.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's just a small tweak to sort out.
Cool. Yeah, it's think I don't think there's anything on my end that I can do. I think it has to be on your end.
Give us 1 second, fam.
All right, chat. While we're waiting, you have my undivided attention. I will entertain you with my brain. I have a bunch of questions that I'm going to answer in the future, but just right now, off the top of your head, what are some PLO questions that you want me to answer? Actually, I should start with Anand's because he did the dono.
Yeah.
So for 10
by the way,
session,
just real quick, Dylan, he sent you a instruction in the Discord chat.
Oh, in Discord chat. All right. I have to get onto Discord. Let's do that here. It's perfect. Whoop. Sure, that's fine. Let's pull this over here. Nothing bad here. Back to this. Easy game. Okay. Select share sound in the bottom left corner of the share selection window. Oh, okay. On Zoom, you're talking about, Rob, correct? Zoom.
That's right, Paul Harris, the joy of the live feed.
Select share sound in the bottom left corner of the share selection window.
Yes, on Zoom, he says.
Yeah, on Zoom. I'm looking at that. Here we go. We're not going to do that.
Tell us all your passwords.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that on stream. All right.
It's probably a full success.
How's that?
Multi-way.
Easy game. All right. Go team. That was easy fix. Easy fix. Not even sweating it.
I mean, I can hear it. Hopefully the chat. I assume the chat can hear it as well. Could you hear that chat? Takes like 2 seconds.
It is my end. Okay. Yeah, chat.
It might seem counterintuitive since you're getting a better price with more people in there, but when you're multi-way,
let me know. How does that feel? We're going to back it up.
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. Perfect. Let's just give them a second to give us the confirmation. Boom. Easy game. All right. Okay.
All right.
So let's listen to the sultry sounds of Andrew's voice here, how he talks through the hand.
You want to rewind and then, because it's only 16 seconds. Okay.
Okay, cool. Let's do it.
Switching tables now and into the PLO, and I get followed to that table by Doug Polk. Nobody tell him that I've been getting coaching from his own upswing PLO coach, Dylan Weisman. In this hand, there's a raise and a call, and Doug calls on my direct right before we toss in the extra $25 with a double suited hand from the straddle. Honestly, even though this hand looks pretty, it's probably a fold multi-way. It might seem counterintuitive since you're getting a better price with more people in there, but when you're multi-way, these low card hands are more likely to be dominated. That said, nobody likes a nit. So 4 ways to a jack high board, and we make bottom set. Doug checks, I check, and the action checks all the way around. The turn is a queen, and this time Doug leads out for full pot. Having a set is nice, but bottom set and multi-way hand versus a pot-sized bet limits how much we're willing to put in there. Folding is too tight though, so I call and the button comes along. The river comes another 3, so caution is out the window. Doug looks like he's about to bet, but then decides on a check. We won't be doing that. Unblocking the stronger hands like overpairs, top 2, and other full houses, I think we should go big here. I decide on a bet of $400, which looking back should be closer to pot for those reasons, but at least it's not terribly small. The button folds pretty quickly and Doug goes into the tank.
How much is that? 3 1? 400.
Eventually, he decides on a call.
Whoa, I'm good. The 1-3 would have been good.
In this,
first off, we love to see Doug Polk losing money on stream. It's great. I love Doug, great friend, but he's got too much money. So I'm happy it went to you, Andrew. That's the first thing I want to say.
He's not going to miss that $400 river call.
He's not even. He literally never thought about it again. So So a couple things. The first point that you make about pre-flop. So chat, for those of you that a lot of you are playing live poker, right? Your main game is like a 1-2 with a $5 bring in or a 5-5, 5-5 with the rock game. And in those games, generally speaking, we go multi-ways pre-flop. It happens a lot of the time. And so a hand like Andrew's, the 3-3-5-7 double suited, that combination does not play well multi-ways. And so what Andrew was saying was like, this should probably be a fold, is correct. I also, even that second point, like no one loves a nit, I think that that's true too. And especially in some live games where if you're playing like super GTO by the book, you're literally just going to be folding a lot. There are better ways to pick the appropriate hands for pre-flop in live games when it's going multi-ways. And generally speaking, we want to pick combinations that are going to play well in multi-way spots, which means they will flop the nuts or flop something like top set. So I would think 3-3-5-7 double suited is not bad in a heads up pot whatsoever, but multi-ways, especially without having absolute position, it's probably a little bit too wide, which Andrew knew during the hand. I would much rather even have a hand like King, King, 7 deuce rainbow, for example, and have it go multi-ways, because literally all I'm doing is set mining. And if the flop goes 3 to 5 ways and we flop top set, that's really robust equity, which means that we're going to most likely be able to be betting multiple streets and be able to cooler somebody. And so that's just the first thing that I was thinking through during this hand. Let's go back to.
Are you ever like, I guess, how do you ever decide? I mean, you might have some actual cutoff points or whatever, but
yeah,
like I assume, I mean, your skill edge is going to be like far and away better than anyone at this table. Probably anyone at this table combined. How do you say like, well, I can probably like get away with a little bit more here. I can navigate my way through this hand a little bit better. Like, how do you squash that train of thought into like making bad calls?
So the first thing that I'm thinking about is how many people do I have to navigate through? Because math doesn't lie. If I'm navigating through 2 people, yeah, I'll have a little bit more wiggle room. It's really hard to finagle 5 people in a hand because that's 20 cards. That's what it's 4 choose 2. So 6 times that's 36 hold'em hand combinations you have to navigate. Wait, 6 choose, yeah. 4 choose, yes, 36 hold'em hand combinations so you have to navigate through. Right, that's a lot. It's really hard to do. So it doesn't really matter how much better you are if you're trying to play against a bunch of different players. So the things that I am thinking about are how many ways am I playing post flop? Will I have absolute position in the hand? Because it's really hard to finagle without absolute position. And then do I have somewhat of an ability to get close to the nuts or even be blocking the nuts, which is really the main thing here. Because if you want to try to outplay people post flop, the being able to open up your range doesn't really matter unless we can effectively block the nuts. So even having like one ace high blocker, let's say we have ace 10, 10, 5, 10 high suit. In that combination, like I might peel that at a high frequency, even though it's a garbage hand, because I can bluff with the ace high suit. I can bluff with the 2 10s as well, because those block the majority of the straights, 10, 10, and 5, 5. We care about 10, 10 more. And also I'll flop a set some percentage of the time. And I don't care about my other flush draw, like my 10 high flush draw. I'm pretty much pretending that it's garbage because you don't want to stack off multi-ways with a 10 high flush.
I mean, we can.
So that's how I'm thinking about it.
We can block some wheels and stuff with it.
We can block the wheels. That's true.
All right, carry on.
This end, but as I said, sometimes you want, like, I like the giving action thing. I try not, especially if I'm playing in games like this, I'm not sitting there playing my GTO ranges. I would probably fight a hand like this too in the game that you're playing and just like mess around post flop. I really like the check on the flop. I think the check on the flop is phenomenal. And this is going to feel really counterintuitive for a lot of newer PLO players, because what a lot of people think when they're starting out PLO is like, oh, I have a set. There are so many turn cards that might make my hand not the best hand. I want to bet and protect my hand. It's a very classic strategy that a lot of the newer players of PLO kind of implement. And it's an intention, and it's something that you really just need to squash as soon as possible, because you have to, like, one of the most beautiful things about PLO is accepting the variance. Like, once you accept that even if you flopped a strong hand, a lot of the times by the time you get to the river, it's not going to be good. Once you accept that, you just become a way more profitable player. Generally speaking, and this situation is a really good example of that. And I really like your check because when we are multi-ways, if we're not blocking the nuts, it's really hard to effectively navigate post flop. Because if I have like one jack here, let's say I have jack 7, 8, 9 with hearts spades, and I'm the under the gun player, I can find a check raise as a bluff at a pretty high frequency. So if you have 3, 3, 5, 7, and I check raise flop, the turn comes the 8, I pot turn, and then the river comes like a king, and then I pot river. Bottom set looks really bad in that spot, especially when you have the 5 and the 7 blocking the straight draw. And so because your opponents have a higher check raising frequency when you don't have the top card multi-ways, you want to be checking your stronger hands, even if they are sets like this. Like I would much rather bet a hand like jack 5, 7, 8 than I would bet this hand. Just because of those blocker interactions. And so I really like the check by Andrew on the flop here. Generally speaking, the way we think about betting with our sets is like we bet top set 90-something% frequency. We bet middle set like something 70-ish% frequency, and then bottom sets around like 40 to 50% frequency. And the bottom sets that you bet will usually have either really good backdoor draws or blockers to the nuts.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, so I love the check here. I think it's super well played.
Check, and
I'm gonna kill the volume as we go through this. Turns a queen, and then we just call the full pot sizing. I'm also, for the same reason that I didn't like betting the flop, I also love the just call here. Our hand is too strong to fold. We unblock all of the draws, right? Doug can have ace, king, 10, 9, 10, king, queen, 9, 10, ace, queen, 10. There are just so many combinations that Doug can have here that are bluffs that we're beating. But we also don't block the nuts, so you don't have a queen or a jack. And so specifically, we don't want to raise this combination, because if we raise, we just allow them to either fold or get it in when we're behind, like either fold when we're ahead or get it in when we're beat. So I love the call here, especially not blocking the nuts. And then onto the river we go. And then Doug checks to us, and we elect to bet 400 into 525. This is in my opinion, another mistake. It's a small mistake because you chose a large sizing. But generally speaking, when we can have an uncapped range, so we can have pocket threes, we can have jack 3, we can have queen 3, we can have pocket 6s, the way that we played this hand, because it's a multi-way spot. Since we're uncapped, I'm not gonna ever use like a 3/4 sizing. I'm gonna be either betting full pot or maybe betting half pot, and it's gonna make it so much easier. Because let's say that I had a hand like 3, 4, 5. Like ace 3, 4, 5 that we have the nut suit with. We want to be able to get value from that combination. Like we want Doug to be able to call with aces, kings, ace, queen, queen, jack, stuff like that, which you mentioned in this hand. We're unblocking a lot of Doug's calling range. And so we want to be betting half pot with that portion of our range. We want to be able to get value from those 3x's, but betting full pot with 3x isn't very good, because if we have a bare 3x, we can still get check raised by pocket jacks, pocket 6s, pocket queens, or they can just have a better 3 than us, like an ace 3, or sorry, like a jack 3 or 6, 3, because not all 3x full houses will be betting the river from Doug's perspective. So that's our half pot range, and then our full pot range is just like is our nutted combinations, pocket queens specifically. We're not going to have very many pocket jacks. Queen 3 is something that we're going to show up with at some frequency, and then our bluffs are going to come from combinations like a queen blocker with bad equity, or like a jack 6 would be another combination we'd be bluffing with here.
And those should be full pot.
Yeah, those should be full. Like, yeah, the hands that, yeah. So the general way to think about it is our bluffing combinations want to mirror our value combinations. This is a little bit a slightly different case because we have pocket threes. And so with pocket threes, we can't really mirror the bluff, because the bluffs that you'd want to have with pocket threes is like your worst 3x combinations, but we don't need to do that here. So we don't need to go that high in our range for our bluffs, but we do want to, like, if we have pocket queens, we'd be betting full pot. So the best bluffing cards to bet full pot with would be a queen in this spot. And that's kind of how I think about it.
So there's an interesting comment here in the chat, because Alan was actually the player on the button, and he says, I had queen jack 6x in this hand on the button. I was ready to jam, but Andrew made it too big. I
actually think that Andrew sizing isn't full pot, and I would probably be ripping queen jack 6 there.
Yeah, that's like the perfect hand to be bluffing with, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the thing. So this is the thing, though. It's like, let's say that Andrew wasn't a player that ever finds bluffs, which is totally a thing that happens in these PLO games. Like, there are players that just never find bluffs. in that specific scenario, even against those players, they might have like 3x or like a 3-6 boat, but they're very rarely going to have the pocket queens, pocket jacks, or pocket sixes. So even against the players that are never bluffing, this is like the queen jack six is still a pretty sick combination to rip with, because even if like for the combinations they're not bluffing with, like the full houses that are the non-nutted full houses. If you only had a little behind, that's completely different. This is saying if you have
I guess so.
like X amount, if you have like a full pot size bet behind for Zach, like yeah, with 350 behind, it's going to be really hard to get him to fold. So that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, let's say that we're deeper. This would be the perfect combination. And
yeah, and by the way, you mentioned how there's like players that never find bluffs. That's like 90% of like the 1-2-5 bring in, I would say, stake level.
Yeah, it's for sure a thing. Even in like the 5-5-10 games, a lot of the non-professional players have a hard time bluffing. And the reason why that's true, the reason why it's hard to find bluffs at PLO, generally speaking, is because a lot of players don't know how to use blocker removal, right? They see like a lot of players from a Hold'em background, let's say that they have king, queen, 10, 9 here, and they got to the river. Like, oh, I have king, queen, I'm just going to check and win. In my brain, I'm thinking, I was called in 2 spots. There's no way that king, queen is good. I need to find a bluff here. I'm blocking pocket queens. This is the right combination to use. Mm-hmm. But because the idea of using what seem to be your really strong hands or your medium strength hands as a bluff is a little foreign to Hold'em players, people tend to find enough bluffs generally. And that's what you see a lot in the lower stakes PLO games.
All right, let's move on. We have like 10 hands in this video. So if
cool. Go through it.
Yeah.
And we call a raise on the button with the ace 10 8 6 nut diamonds, and we go multi-way to the king high flop with 2 diamonds. First player leads for 50, and there's a call, and we're happy to call 2. The turn gives us the nut flush, and this time the first player checks it. The player in the middle puts out a bet of $85, and I call in position. In hindsight, pretty sure this is a mistake. I think there's merit to flatting in position since we often fold out all worse hands with a raise, and we can still make sure there's a bet on the river being in position. But with this hand being multi-way, I think we're giving too good of a price to the first player to continue and improve. As we see here, that player calls, and we're downgraded from the nuts when the board pairs on the river. Action checks to me, and not blocking any of the full houses, I decided to check it back, but it's no good versus the boat of the first player. I like my play on all the streets here a lot, except for the flat call on the turn.
So I agree with literally everything you said in this video.
Okay.
There's nothing that I would add. I'm just going to add a couple extra notes here for some newer PLO players. This hand I would much rather play than 3-3-5-7 double suited. It looks kind of garbagey because it has like the gaps in it, but we love the ace high suit. Ace high suit, great. It has some connectivity. I'm not going to be 3-betting with this hand, but especially in a live PLO game, I'm going to be peeling this at a really high frequency. So I like that we found the call here. On the flop, we decided to check back. I love this as well.
No, we flat call on the flop.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we decided to call on the flop and not raise. Excuse me, which I'm a huge fan of. The reason being that we block no pairs. So if we have ace king with the nut draw, then we're allowed to play a raise at some frequency with our nut flush draws. But when we have no pair blockers, we don't remove enough equity from our opponent's range to play a raise. And we also have absolute position, so it's not bad to keep. It's not bad to keep deeper stacks, generally speaking. The other phenomenal thing about this hand is that when we call, especially in live PLO games, players with lower flush draws, let's say the queen or the jack high flush draw, let's say they have a hand like 5-6 jack 10 with the jack high flush draw or 10 high flush draw. It incentivizes those opponents to peel as well, even if it's a little bit too wide of a peel, which allows us to stack them on later streets. So this is one of the big things about playing these low to middle stakes live PLO games is that because everyone's ranges are so wide, we want to allow them to make made hands when we have a draw. Because if we're playing the appropriate ranges, which means that we're playing hands that only are drawing to the nuts or drawing to the nuts at a higher frequency, when our opponent has a wide range, we're just going to be dominating them super, super often. So I love playing the flat here.
Are you raising flop with mainly just top pairs or other middle and bottom pairs as well?
I usually for the same reason that we didn't raise our set in the previous hand. It's also why I'm not going to be raising a ton of combinations without the king blocker in this hand.
Okay.
Because we're multi-ways. King is just a huge portion of opponent's range. when
Got it.
when there's a C bet on this board texture. So you like if I have ace 4-4-5, ace high suit, that might be one of the few like 4-4 combinations that I'd be using. But generally speaking, I'm going to want to have a king here in order to play a raise. And then moving forward to the turn, I also, so this is a really weird spot. And to be honest, not a spot that I've run a lot because it's really hard to run turn multi-way sims. But from experience and something that I have understood, at least from heads up pots, is that we don't have a super wide raising range here. And the only combinations that we do raise are either the nut flush or the nut flush blocker. And we also don't want to be blocking any pairs is the other thing. Because if we're unblocking pairs, it makes it so that our opponent's still likely to have a set, and that subset is allowed to bet call still. Right. So if I have like ace 4-3 or ace 9-4 with the nut diamonds here, I should raise that combination at a lower frequency than I should if I'm unblocking any of the pairs. Like your hand is pretty much the perfect hand to raise with because we block no pairs. And we also allow the queen high flush, the jack high flush, and the 10 high flush all to be available. So all of the flushes that are higher rank other than the ace high suit are available, which are a higher probability of bet calling. And so we're going to be mixing raising with our nut flushes on the turn here, depending on our side cards. And this combination is literally the perfect combination to play a raise with because of all the things that I previously stated, right? Unblocking all the pairs, unblocking all the second, third, fourth best flushes. And what you also said is correct in that if the third player in the hand has a set or a 2-pair combination, we are giving them pretty close to the correct odds to just call because our opponent used a very small sizing. Generally speaking, on a board texture that's locked down, when there's a small sizing being played, it's very rare that your opponent's going to have the nut flush. They're most likely going to have a middling combination. And in that situation, we can actually increase our bluffing frequency. So I wouldn't just be bluffing with the ace of diamonds in this spot to this sizing. I'd also probably be bluffing with like the queen of diamonds plus some removal as well, like queen of diamonds, king, so that they're less likely to have pocket kings. And those combinations I think are going to play better as a bluff when your opponent uses a smaller sizing because the range is wider, right? The smaller you bet, the wider your range is, generally speaking, in terms of value combinations. But yeah, that's this. I like this turn spot. It highlights a lot of attributes that a lot of players aren't looking for, specifically how to quote unquote mix different hand classes. Because in Hold'em, it's the whole idea of you use an RNG or whatever to mix for different hands. But in PLO, we don't really need to do that often. It's much easier to use our side cards because we have 4 cards in our hand, and it's really important to leverage all of that information, right? Andrew's hand removes none of the value that's directly below his, which makes it more likely our opponent has a strong range, which makes them more likely to call. If I had ace, let's say I just had the ace blocker here, and I somehow showed up to the turn with this combination, I also wouldn't be raising that combination either. I would be just calling it. Sorry, no, I would just be calling it because it's more likely that our opponent's going to be bet calling the turn, given the combination that we have.
Makes sense.
That was a little bit of a long-winded answer, chat, but it's
super valuable.
Yeah, you gotta read through it. So we play a call, and then the river pairs the board. It checks us, and we check back. I love this for the same exact reasons that I would have raised the turn. And it's because we unblock all the full houses. We have no pair blockers. We have the nut flush and no pair blockers. And so it's very, very likely that our opponents have some sort of a 2-pair combination, especially when the top card pairs. If it was the 3 pairing, you might be able to find a betting frequency. Let's say we have a 4 in our hand, then we can probably find a betting frequency. But when the top card pairs, that's the card most likely to be in everyone's range where we don't have it, the highest ranking board pair. And so this card specifically is the worst one to bet. So I'm really happy you found a check back here. Nice.
All right.
Feels
Moving
good.
on.
Moving on. We're moving back in time. No, same session. All right.
Nope.
Let's listen to Andrew's nice voice again.
A little short-handed here. The first player to act raises to $35 before we look at a super playable 8764 double suited on the button. This is an awesome hand to put into our 3-bet range, so we take the opportunity and make it 115 to go, which deters almost nobody. There's 2 cold calls and the initial raiser calls as well. How do you guys not love PLO? 4 ways to a flop that connects with us big time. A wrap plus a flush draw. If you're not familiar with PLO, a wrap is a straight draw where 3 or more cards would give us a straight. In this instance, that would be a 6, 7, or 8. And what's even better is that any of those cards would be the nut straight. The flush draw is a little less interesting to us since it's so low, but if someone has a higher flush draw, then at least we're blocking their outs. There's 2 checks, and the player who put in the first pre-flop raise leads out for $450. Folding is out of the question, so we can choose between flatting and getting it in. While our hand looks amazing, it's not the nut draw that we could have here. There's a higher wrap available, and of course a higher flush draw too. Multi-way pots, always complicated, but having the button seems like a good advantage here, so I decide to flat call and see what develops. The other 2 players get out of the way, and we go heads up to a turn. The jack of spades is not a good one. He continues with the aggression and puts us all in. Our straight draws could be worthless now if my opponent had a hand like king, king, queen 10 or king, queen 10, 9. But is it possible that both of our draws are worthless? Chances are my opponent flopped a set or 2 pair and wanted to protect versus 3 players. So if that were the case and our draws are all live, it would be a disaster to fold all that equity away. Then again, versus a straight, we're pretty dusted. So it's a fine line, but I didn't bring my vlogging camera to capture myself folding turns with a wrap and a flush draw. Okay, let's gamble.
Twice?
2 times is good.
Oh, twice?
There's good news and bad news in this hand. Bad news is that we run it twice and see 2 of the biggest bricks possible, a red deuce on both runouts. The silver lining is that my opponent had
King Jack 8-5
without a club draw, so while he flopped 2 pair, our draws were super live. In fact, we're a slight favorite on the flop and still have 45% equity going into the river. Just need a little help from the Run Good department here at Resorts World, which apparently was busy serving other customers so far.
a bit later.
All right, let's run it back. So there's a lot going on in this hand. Let's go back to pre-flop. Yeah, let's go back to pre-flop and start from there. So generally speaking, double suited rundown combinations are very, very good to 3-bet. That's a true statement. The lower double suited rundown combinations are not good to 3-bet in games where you're going to be called a lot multi-ways. This combination does not play well multi-ways, especially like that'll become more apparent when I get to the turn. But the reason why we 3-bet this type of combination pre-flop is because it plays really well heads up, right? We have a ton of equity. When the flop comes king 9-5, 2 clubs, we just can pot, get it in, don't really have to think about very much. In a multi-way scenario, this combination feels really awkward. And the other thing that is important to note, and this is something that a lot of Hold'em players, legacy Hold'em players like yourself, Andrew, they kind of fall into this trap. We've talked about this a lot, so I don't think that you are anymore, but just saying it out loud. It's important to actually 3-bet less on the button and more from other positions. And the reason why this is true is because if we're on the button, by definition, we're going to have absolute position. And whereas if I'm on the cutoff, I need the button to fold in order to have absolute position. And so in order to do that, I get to 3-bet actually at a higher frequency from the cutoff than I would on the button. And so that's the first thing here. So if we're in the cutoff, I'd like this 3-bet more than on the button. But on the button, because we're supposed to play a wider flatting range, we should actually be calling this combination most likely. The other reason being that this is a live PLO game, right, where we 3-bet and nobody folds. And so when that's the case, when you're in a game, I would much rather a 3-bet with ace 6, 7, 8 double suited than 4, 6, 7, 8 double suited, because we need to block the pocket aces at some frequency. Plus, the flop's going to go multi ways, and we want to be able to flop the nut flush draw in a 4-way pot. It makes it much easier to play the hand post. And we do it is important to be able to have board coverage on these lower boards, like with our 5, 6, 7, 6, 7, 8 combinations. But generally speaking, especially in live PLO, you usually want to have the ace with it, so that when it does go multi-way, like in this combination, like in this spot, it doesn't feel as bad.
Got it.
Yeah, and that leads directly into my flop analysis, where we flop the world like we flop, as you said, a wrap, which means we make a straight with a 6, 7, and an 8, all of which being the nuts, yeah, all of which would be the nuts. And we have a 7 high flush draw. And when our opponent pots into us, I still am leaning fold at some frequency. I'm leaning not 100, I'd have to run it, but because we have 2 players behind us and we have no pair blockers, right? And so it's very likely not only that the hand will be continued against us, but that one of the other two players are going to check rip. Also, when the first player is betting full pot into us, that is like at the worst top two pair, right? At the worst top two, especially live PLO multi-ways, help me click the pot button, has a strong hand. And we don't block the higher wrap. So a lot of, like, remember, we 3-bet and there were multiple callers. And so the queen jack 10 combinations, those are super dense in our opponent's flat calling range to a 3-bet, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very likely that our opponent has some sort of a top rundown single suited combination, and our hand blocks nothing that's beating us. If I were to continue in this hand, I'd be ripping the flop instead of calling it, because I need to disincentivize like queen high flush draws and jack high flush draws from continuing. And so yes, because we have the positional advantage, we do want to be leveraging it, but SPR is not even 1 on the turn.
Right.
They bet 900 and there's like 1.3 in the pot or something, if I remember correctly. And so we don't even have an SPR of 1, which means we're not really getting to leverage our positional advantage. And so I'm either ripping or folding, and probably leaning towards folding, unless it's a game where I have to gamble and then I'm just going to rip it in. Like that's the way that I'm like, if I'm in like a live private game and I flop this combination, I'm just going to go with it, even if I'm dominated. But if I'm like sitting there try-harding, we're playing, and I somehow threw out this combination and get to the flop, I'm probably going to be folding.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. Like to flop this this well and lean towards fold.
Yeah, PLO is a weird game. There's 3 other ranges, right? And not only are there 3 other ranges, there are 3 other ranges that are specifically centered around the top part of the deck because they played a flat to a 3-bet.
Yeah.
Right. There was no 4-bets, which means that we remove pocket aces, and then pretty much all pocket aces because people always 4-bet aces live. And then, but we keep a lot of pocket kings. Like we keep a lot of pocket kings. And then we keep a lot of like 10 jack queen type stuff.
And then if this was heads up, if we didn't have the cold callers behind us and the pre-flop caller leads pot.
Are we flat? Heads up is a very different scenario than 3-ways, because if first off, the out of position player should never be leading into us on this board. And if this is like GTO land, we 3-bet, they call flop is king 9-5 2-tone. They don't have any leads here. Like, or they'll have a very small amount of leads because they're dense in the king portion of range, but the majority of people are going to play this as an absolute check in a simplified game tree, that's technical jargon for saying if played perfectly, the easiest strategy is to check your whole range. And then when we do get let into here, we in a heads up pot are heavily leaning towards them having like a top 2 pair or a set, because in order for someone to lead in a 3-bet pot, they don't tend to lead with like queen high flush draw type combinations or even ace high flush draw type combinations. They're going to be leading with their made hands. And so our wrap and our flush draw is much more powerful against one range where the range is way more weighted towards a made hand.
All right.
Yeah, cool. Moving forward. Yeah, but this is one of the reasons why live PLO is so hard. You flopped the world, right? Like this, you couldn't dream of a better flop. And then it's just like, he's got it's like not that
backdoor
good.
Diamonds too.
Yeah, that's a thing. That's 2.5% equity. You got to factor that in. Another thing to think about, chat, this is really, really good to look at, is your raw equity against your opponent's hand, especially if you're new to PLO. Every time you get all in, run the equity, just because it'll start to calibrate your brain away from what the equities that you're used to at Hold'em into PLO equities. The little bit of a negative with this specific graphic is that we were looking at our opponent's hand, which is literally, I think, the best hand they could possibly have. Like all the pairs, none of the, like they had an 8 instead of a 9. So I think the sim is a little bit off because they block one of your outs. But like this is the best hand our opponent can possibly have for us to be up against. And we have 55 and 45% equity. When that's the case, that means that we're probably pretty dead against their range if we were to input their whole range in this spot. So just another thing to think about there. All right, into the online streets with the lovely back selfie. Let's go. Okay.
Later on, with a couple more players at the table. That same player from the last hand opens from under the gun. There's 2 callers, and we have a good double suited hand that I want to 3-bet with. I've noticed this player in the under the gun spot might have been a little frustrated by this point and was looking to gamble. So I want to get it in versus him and shut the other players out. If I 3-bet to a full pot size bet, the action won't be reopened if the under the gun 4-bet jams. But if I go a little smaller, then it'll reopen the betting and I can then 5-bet. Joe Wah seems undeterred by all of this and cold calls anyway for more than half of his or her stack. That's never a premium hand, so after the button gets out of the way, I'm going to stick it in and we'll have a 3-way all in. Looking at the hand matchups, it's an extremely fair fight between myself and the 9-9-5-5 single suited, with the under the gun player winning about 20% of the time. Flop is mostly good for us when we hit top pair, but the under the gun player does have reasonable equity here with a higher flush draw. Turn is a brick, but the river is a very unfortunate 5 of hearts, which is going to give the 9-9-5-5 an unlikely scoop with only one card to come. Fun game.
Did y'all hear the salt chat? Did you hear the salt in the fun game
You got to
comment
put
at
some
the end?
emotion in these
I love it.
these
I love
online
it.
poker hands.
I love it. No, honestly, this hand was described perfectly. And I'm just going to say a couple things one more time, but I literally would play it the exact same way. So the first thing, chat, is that when you got someone tilted in PLO, what Sensei says to do is not to be 3-betting your rundown combinations. We care the most about having high card power. Because if someone has a really wide range, we don't really care about having like 6, 7, 8, 9 double suited or 7, 8, 9, 10 double suited. Those combinations play really well in a deep heads up pot. But our opponent here has about 30-ish big blinds to start the hand, even less than 30 big blinds to start the hand, and they're tilted, which means that they're just going to be ripping it with a large portion of range. And so we really want to have a combination like our own. We have ace king, which is really, really good. We have the double suit, which is really, really good. And when you have flat callers behind you, you definitely want to isolate this tilted player and try to get them to go all in. What Andrew said about raising to a non-full pot sizing is incredibly important. The reason being that if you don't reopen the action and the player who's under the gun goes all in and then Joe off flats, it allows Sylvie, who is very deep and in position, to flat as well because the action will not be reopened to us. You have to raise at least double the difference between the last bets. And so if we make it full pot, or if we make it full pot here, it's, I don't want to do 42, 50, 56, 58. If we make it 58 here, the difference between 14 and 58 is, no, it's not 58, it's 58 plus 14. It's 72. So if we make it 72 here, which is our full pot sizing, the difference between 72 and what's left in our opponent's stack, so that would be, what is this? 108 minus 72, 40 something, right? Is not double 72. Therefore, the person who's next, if they just flat call, close the action. And so it's really important if you're in these games and you're trying to isolate people to look at your opponent's stacks. This is like a massive leak that a lot of live PLO players have, is they're not looking at their opponent's stacks. Online it's a little bit easier, but definitely tune in live if you're trying to isolate somebody. And so Andrew makes the appropriate play here by not raising to a full pot sizing, leaving the action open. We just show it really here. This player goes all in. This player just calls. We never let them just call. We always punish them. And then this is going to force Sylvie to fold at a really high frequency, which allows us to go all in. So yeah, I love the way this hand is played. I love the choice of combination as well. If we had a hand like ace, 6, 7, 8 double suited, generally speaking, I'd rather 3-bet that hand. But in this spot, I'd rather call it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Okay.
And then showing the equities, fair fight, but as Andrew said, he's just unlucky. All right, moving on to the next hand. Any questions on that, Andrew?
No, I think that one is mostly straightforward.
Yeah, easy peasy. A lot of people mess it up though, so I'm like really good spot for you to show.
Yeah, I mean, I still mess it up sometimes when just miss the stack size. It's like, I should have raised a different amount.
Yeah, sometimes yeah, it's a good thing to learn the easy way before you're in like a massive game, because then you don't want to make that mistake. All right, moving on. We've got some more PLO online.
From under the gun, and there's a 3-bet from the cutoff with the button making the cold call. After watching a lot of the action in previous hands, I would describe all these players as looking to gamble. Still, I decided to flat call rather than trying to play a deep stacked 4-bet pot from out of position with the king by 5 single suited if the cutoff were to flat us. But what happens next changes everything. The under the gun player sticks it in, which is just enough to reopen the betting, and the cutoff player puts in another re-raise. The button flats yet again, and based on what's been happening, I don't think we need to attribute a narrow range of basically aces only like we would in some other spots. I think the kings will probably perform well versus a wider range, so I put in the 6-bet all in. Everyone calls. Welcome to the madness of pot limit Omaha. We can disregard the under the gun short stack, so looking at the other 3 hands, we see that the button is actually a favorite, with the biggest stack having the least equity, which is ideal. If we remove that middle-sized stack, we're actually crushing the king high rundown as 71% favorites. The flop doesn't help us at all, and it puts the button way out in front. But as long as an 8 doesn't come, then we're in great shape for the side pot versus the biggest stack. And that's what drawing dead looks like.
Forgot about that. I don't know why I'm watching this pain again. Who wants to watch all this pain
Over
again?
on the 2-4 table, playing
Oh my
four-handed
God,
free
I could just hear you making these videos.
What a joy. What an absolute joy.
So
Vlogging is the best, man.
Oh, talking about PLO downswings. Isn't it even better when you do it and people are watching, just like getting smashed in the face? It feels so good. Okay, let's talk about this hand. First off, this is some very ruckusy gameplay, right? Where we have the raise 3-bet. I like the overcall here from the small blind, especially given how deep we are.
Okay.
This combination is not great. I'm not gonna lie. So the king 5-5, the 5-5 is really good when we have a deeper stack to pot ratio, because that's when set mining is the best. Like we can flop a king or a 5, be able to get paid over multiple streets. In a heads up equity scenario, the 5-5 is actually acting against us. We'd much rather have like a 6-7 than a 5-5 because of the probability of a flop being able to help us. So the 5-5, even though it looks pretty and we're kind of programmed to like double paired hands, it doesn't interact as well at this specific scenario, because if we are up against aces, we have less overall equity with 5-5 than, for example, a 6-7. It's better than having like 2-3 or whatever, but that's something that I think a lot of players don't really understand is where the power of these pairs come from. They come from having deep stack to pot ratio, being able to flop a set and like get paid over multiple streets. With that being said, if people are super, super wide, like you're describing, kings are pretty good. And so we don't want to 4-bet here without ace king king, because the math, like even if people are crazy spewy, math says that 3-bets and then 4-bets and 5-bets usually are aces, which is why when it gets all the way back to us and this player rips and this player overcalls, I'm probably just folding.
Yeah.
Even if they have their specific hand, right? Let's look at the equities right now. Like even against these 2 specific hands, we barely have break-even equity 3 ways. And we're against literally one of the best combinations we can be up against, which is king, queen, jack 10. All they needed to have is 1 ace in their hand to be a favorite against our combination, generally speaking. So if each of these players have like ace X or which will happen at a high frequency ace ace, I think that we have to fold this combination given how deep we are, because we're like 200 something bigs deep to start the hand.
So it's still like just too speculative, even versus players that are a little more actiony. Just get it in.
For 200 bigs, yes. I think it like if people are just like crazy action and you have 100 bigs and you have kings, you can just rip it and not really think about it. But the deeper we get, the more we just like we have to obey the law of math, where it's just like it just becomes such a bigger mistake when they have 2 aces the deeper we get. And that's the best way to think about it. Like if they have ace here without hearts and no king or 5, okay, we got it in as like a 25% equity 3 ways for 100 bigs. Getting into a 25% equity for 200 bigs or 300 bigs is not what we want to do at a high frequency. And as we see here, like even in one of the literal best case scenarios that we can possibly think of, right? The ace 3, 9, 6 double and the king, queen, jack 10 with the worse suit than ours, right? The same suit, but worse. In a perfect scenario, we barely have 33% equity 3 ways. So that's, I think, the best way to think about this hand. Like almost best case scenario, still not that great.
Yeah.
But if we have ace, king, king, completely changes everything. Like these equities look very different if we had ace, king, king. Okay. Or like ace, king, king, 10, something like that.
All right.
Cool. Matt asks a very good question, which is, do you factor future games into this, keeping the 200 BB stack intact and passing on the spot for better one against these goofballs? That's another good thing to think about. It's like, you're going to find good spots to get it in 200 bigs against these people. With that being said, there is something to be said about increasing the variance against worse players. And this is like this is one of those things that Galfond talked about when I was in high school. So I was like 17. So it's been over a decade since I learned this, but if we were playing a higher variance style against worse opponents, that's fine in some situations, as long as like the opponents don't have some like high hit and run frequency. The reason being that even if we lose and we show up being deeper now against our opponents, we are going to play better deeper, right? And so let's say that they like Chief Keys wins this hand, they're 500 big blinds deep, and then we double up once, and now we're 200 bigs. We're going to play so much better 200 bigs deep than our opponent is. And so even if the worst player wins, they're going to be at the table with a really deep stack, and they're going to misplay heavily, especially in PLO, out of position, for example. And so this is why a lot of the times when you play live PLO, you see people with like, whatever, $7,000 in the rock game at the Aria. 3 hours later, you might see them bust out. And it's because they're not playing those really deep stacks as effectively as they need to. And so there is something to be said about kind of passing up the spot and looking for better spots, but there's also something to be said about taking higher variance approaches so that, because even if you lose, you still have a higher EV in the game, is probably the best way to think about it.
So what is it? You take the higher variance route, or you take the play the math?
I usually take the high variance route, but I do it with finesse. That's a Chris Wayner term. Yeah, which is what, like, if I have ace king here, I'm not even thinking about it. I'm just snap ripping it in against someone who's spewy. And this is why PLO is very much a game of edges. It's a game of finding those little optimizations that you can make. A lot of players aren't going to be discerning the difference between king 5-5 and king 6-7. If I have king 6-7 double here, and this is against a spewy opponent, I'm ripping it. I'm just ripping it, not thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But king 5-5 with one, even king 5-5 double suited, I'm not thinking about it. I'm just ripping it. Mm-hmm. But the single suited variation here is, I think it's going to be not strong enough, even if we want to increase variance, or even if we are choosing that line. I'd, instead of like, you know, the meme like, ¿por qué no los dos? It's like, I'd rather play high variance, but also have high EV. So I just want to find both. Cool. All right. Moving on in the salty sessions. Let's see. All right, back to the online game here. All right.
2-4 table, playing four-handed. We raise the ace jack 8-5 with a nut suit, and the big blind calls. We don't flop all that much, so I decide not to c-bet here. On the turn, we had a gut shot to the nuts and face a bet of 20. I decided to get a little frisky here with the float. There's some river cards that will improve us, and some other cards where we can do some other things. The offsuit jack is an interesting one. My opponent bets half pot, and my thoughts are that this is one of those cards where we can do some things. We have a blocker to the nut straight, and removal to top set, and the best two pairs. I raise it up to a little over 3 times his bet, and without too much time, he lets it go.
Andrew, you said all the words that just make me hot and bothered. I love it.
Wow.
It's really good. So the turn float is a little spicy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little spicy. Pre-flop is fine. Turn float, definitely spicy. We have one diamond, which is good, but our nut, like, and we have 2 straight draws, but one of our straight draws is, no, we have 3 straight draws. We have 3 straight draws. We have the 10, the 10, the 6, and the 3. Yeah, so we have 3 straight draws, but no pair blockers, which is why it's a little on the spicy side. Also, we only have, what, 3 clean nut outs with no pair blockers. With that being said, having the jack of diamonds is good because you have the jack of diamonds and because you have no pair blockers, it puts them much more in the camp of having like a 2-pair combination, right? So, so what I just did there, chat, I'm going to say it more slowly so that you can all process through how you can evaluate your opponent's ranges. We always want to think about it in the context of, am I able to remove equity from my opponent's range with my combination? And am I able to add equity to my range with my combination? And so in that context, our combination adds equity because we have these different straight draws, right? We have 3 nut outs and then 3 non-flushing outs for the second nut straight on a 6 and a 3. So that adds equity to our range. We also remove equity from our opponent's range by having the jack of diamonds. So it's less likely they have a flush draw, which is the worst thing for them to have when we have a straight draw, is to have that flush draw. We remove equity from our opponent's range there. The things that we don't block are the pairs. We have no pair blockers. And so the jack of diamonds acts kind of as a homing mechanism where it's like, you can't have the jack of diamonds, which means that it's less likely that you have not only a flush draw, but also maybe even a better straight draw, like 8-10 jack, for example, the top wrap. And I also have no pairs. So combined with the fact that you can't have the jack of diamonds, and me having no pairs, now it's really likely that they have a 2-pair combination or a set, or like some sort of a combo draw, like a pair plus a draw type of a thing. And so that's what I'm doing every single hand, just very quickly, is I'm seeing how much equity my hand adds to my range, removes from my opponent's range, and then I think about how is my range supposed to be playing in general in this spot, and then I make a decision. I think we're going to be playing a lot of calls on the turn here, and we're not going to get a lot of raises unless we have a 9 in our hand. And so I like Andrew's call. Like if we're going to continue, and I think that this will be one of those spots, Andrew, you were talking about earlier. It's like, when do I get a little more hyphy? Like feeling like I can outplay people. This is for sure a spot against players who are a little bit weaker that I'm just not going to be folding, because I feel as if I'll be able to navigate the river better than them. And I think that they're probably going to be over folding on the river. Like a lot of players, for example, on the Jack river that we get here, let's turn off the volume. On the Jack that we get to here, a lot of players will be folding a hand like Jack 7, even sometimes when we raise their river bet. Like Jack 7, I actually think is a great, like let's say we have Jack 7-8, and we want to bet the river. We are allowed to bet the river with Jack 7-8. Even some Jack 9 combinations is allowed to bet the river as well. But those are going to our smaller sizing. On the river, we usually want to play a 2-sizing strategy as the out of position player, about a bet 33 and a bet 100. Chris goes over this in depth in the advanced course. Obviously, this isn't the case for every single river, but that's a general way to kind of think about it. And so a 2-pair combination with a Jack, or even a hand like I don't know if we're allowed to bet 7-9, because a lot of our straight draws have a Jack in it. So we can't really bet 7-9, but we can bet like Jack 4, Jack 7, Jack 9, especially if they have an 8 or a 10 in it. And I'd be using my small sizing in that spot. A lot of players, they're going to be betting those combinations and then folding when raised, because they don't know how to find a bluff on the river. So they're never going to be expecting their opponent to find a bluff either, which is why your raise is so strong. We block the best 2 pairs, as you said, and we block the nuts, which is the most important. Like that's the most important thing, is we have the 8, and the 8 blocks 8-10. And so when our opponent uses this small sizing, it's going to be super challenging to find, for them to be able to find a bet call. One, because they don't know how to find bet calls, because they don't know how to bluff. And because they don't know how to do that, their brain's going to say, oh, my opponent raised, they have the nuts, I fold. And that happens so often in PLO. And so I think that this hand was played. This is one of the better hands I've seen you play for sure. I really like the river raise. The turn float is a little speculative without the pair blockers, but because these are games where players are a little less competent and they're going to probably be overfolding the river, we're allowed to create more of those situations where we can find those folds.
Nice.
Hell yeah. So yeah, very well played here. Looking at the chat real quick. Cool. All right, move on to the next hand. This is moving through at a good pace. I really like the edited videos. I think that this was I think the setup is way better than how we've done previously.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, moving on.
Have a PLO bomb pot where we look down at a connected Jack 10, 8, 7 with 2 clubs. We're flopping the absolute world here this time. We flop the nut straight plus a flushed redraw on one board, and top 2 pair plus a gutter to the nuts on the other board. Before the action gets to me, there's a bet of $50. Ladies and gentlemen, it is go time. I put in the max raise to $240, and we'll be happy to see further action at this point. There's a cold call behind me, and the player on my right makes the call. The turns are not all that ideal. We no longer have the nut straight, and once again, our 2 pairs are counterfeited. But as previously mentioned, whenever that happens, we can easily rep boats, and now we have a couple of redraws to go along with our straight. The player on my right checks, and I put out a bet of $450. The player on my left thinks for a long time before letting it go. Back to the player on my right, who decides he's liking what he's seeing, and he ships it in there. I don't think we have too much choice here. We're going to have to call, and we're going to have to see a couple of river cards. Nothing changes, as we still have a straight on the one board and jacks and 7s on the other board. Time for the reveal, and our opponent shows King 9, 8, 6, giving him the same straight as us, as well as trips on the other board. This is bad news because it means we're chopping the one board and he wins the other, also known as 75% of the pot for him, also known as us getting quartered. We had him in a dominated spot early in the hand. He flopped a worse straight without a flush draw and just 1 pair plus open ender on the other board with no flush draw there either. The tables can turn pretty quickly, it seems, when there's 2 boards and 4 cards a man, and we get pretty unlucky here. Next hand happens on the 2-4.
I'm not trying to laugh.
This can be the first hand to the bomb pot module coming soon in the PLO mastery course.
So I actually have done a little bit of work on bomb pots. Double pair bomb
You
pots.
have?
I have not. I have, yeah. Because you actually can run bomb pots by just giving everyone 100% call pre-flop and then running the flop. And so I'm going to give you all a little bit of bomb pot GTO strat right now.
Nice.
The first thing to know, this is double board bomb pot. This is just very different. The best way I would think about this kind of a situation would be if I had a bomb pot in like PLO high low, and I haven't had the time to, like, that's getting pretty into like the nitty gritty of should I have time to run. So I haven't done any work there. But so in bomb pots, generally speaking, the way that you think about it is that everyone shows up to the flop with the same range, right? There's no, it's as if you have the pre-flop ranges on the flop. So you literally just take the normal ranges that you would run pre-flop, just like everyone can have a random 4 cards, and they show up to the flop with those combinations. And so what ends up happening in PLO is when all the ranges are the same showing up to the flop, position becomes really, really, really important. So let's say we have a bomb pot and we're an 8-handed table, and we flop as good as we did. Like we have a really, like, let's see what the flop looked like again, just so we can have the visual here, because it's kind of hard to think about in our brains. So here we are. So we flop top 2 pair plus straight draw on the top board, and we flop the stone nuts with 2 pair and a flush draw on the bottom. Wow, you had it. Like you had it. I didn't even see how good you had it. All right. So this is like as good about, you would have the 8 of diamonds blocking. Yeah, this is literally as good as you can probably hope for, right? And let's say we're under the gun in this spot. I'm checking. I actually check in GTO land. You check your entire range from the first, I think 4. I might misremember this for PLO. I learned about this from a Hold'em player, and then I looked at it in PLO afterwards. But it's you pretty much check the first 4 to 5 positions if you're playing 8-handed, because if all ranges are the same, the only thing that's important is your position. And so the way that you would think about betting in this spot is the same thing that you think about having a leading range. And it's really, really hard to play a leading range into 7 random hands in PLO. And by really hard, I mean it's impossible to do against 7 random hands in PLO because of our positional disadvantage. And so a really good strat for all you players who play with bomb pots is that just play a check with 100% of your range from the first 4 positions. I might be misremembering this. I'm pretty sure this is how it works. But I've only run one sim on this, and so it might have just like been a one-off fluke, but this is something that I have done. Now with our specific hand, I don't believe we're in with the first couple of positions, right? We're like just somewhere in the middle position.
I think, yeah, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. If it gets to like this hand is just so strong that we want to play a bet specifically in split pot games. And this is why a lot of players are bad at PLO 8 and split pot games generally, especially like the big bet split pot games. It's because every time you get your opponent to fold, you like if everyone folded here and this was the flop, if everyone folded, I'd still be stoked. Like, hell yeah, I win the whole pot. Because it's so unlikely to be able to win the whole pot against random hands. And so even like just random hands with this flop, it's going to be super hard to win the whole thing. And so we want to force as many folds as possible. So if I'm betting here, I'm just probably going to have an only full pot strategy. I'm not going to play any small sizings. I'm just going to like bet full pot or check is what I would probably simplify to you here. And that's specifically because it's double board, and because they're both dynamic unpaired boards, right? So it's as wet as possible. Even though the straight's available, it's still dynamic unpaired because of how many draws are available on the bottom board. So it's as dynamic as possible, which means that almost every turn card is going to change the nuts on both boards. So we either going to be checking because it's very hard to have a hand that has enough equity, or with our combination, like let's say that we've had on the top board, we had Jack, ace, or what's the most robust hand on the top board? It's something like Jack, diamond combination. And then we have nothing on the bottom board, or we have Jack, so we're blocking the straight, right? Even if I have nothing on the bottom board, I'm going to be betting the full pot because I want to fold out as many of the other hands as possible in order to get all of that, get all that equity for free instead of having to earn it on the river. And that's, I think, for like a lot of these double pair PLO bomb pots are showing up. For those, like, you're not going to be that deep either, generally speaking, right? Like if it's a $50 bomb pot, there's 8 ways, it's $400 pre, you're playing 5-5 or 5-10, you're going to have at most like an SPR 4 or 5, right? And so it's really easy to like pot flop, pot turn, and then have the game tree be very small. And that's the best advice I can give people for bomb pots generally. And you can take that into your normal games. You're not going to find that anywhere else on the internet. I wasn't planning on making that information public.
I
but
put this
whatever.
in here just to see what the hell you were gonna react with, and that
Yeah.
was very, very helpful. So you think
Yeah.
just checking the first 4 spots is pretty much with full range is the play?
It is. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's. I have to do more work on it, so I don't want to say it. Like in other spots, I can say definitively, but I'm pretty like that's how I'm like. I play in like big private games that have like double war bomb pots or whatever. This is how I'm playing the strategy. Like this is my strategy in these spots. And you could just make it like people are just playing them awfully, like just super awfully, and you make a lot of like. If you think about checking your whole range in the first couple of positions, let's say you check the stone nuts, it's almost impossible for it to check all the way through. So you're almost always going to get a check raise. And when you check raise, you're going to be able to get more folds as well. So you get to play against less people. And even if it checks all the way through, that's fine. Because now you can play a full pot lead on the turn or a check on the turn, depending on what you want. And we're still only have 2 streets of betting. So you can pot turn, pot river and get all the money in that way. Right. So checking the flop literally has no disadvantages. It only has the advantages of nullifying your positional disadvantage.
Sounds good.
All right. You put this in here, and that's why I started laughing. I'm just like, fuck. Like this is sorry, but for Christy, but like this is
That's great.
That's some deeper strat. The fact that you get Corbin in this spot is hilarious. Like that just is so brutal. But this is why we play the great game.
This is super standard Texas. What it does to me every time I go there.
Oh no, I should maybe go out to Texas with you next time and see if I can ride the variance wave.
You need to go.
Yeah, I'm down. All right, next hand, everybody.
2-4 table. The hijack comes in for a raise. We flat the ace 9-7-4 double suited on the button. If that second suit is a little bit higher, then we're definitely mixing in some 3 bets. But with this hand, I decide to flat, and the big blind makes the call as well. 3 ways to a pretty favorable one in which we flop the nuts. The big blind leads right out, which is pretty reasonable considering that he's probably going to have a lot of the stronger hands here, more so than the initial raiser. The initial raiser does get out of the way, and it's over to us sitting there with the nuts. I could definitely get behind a raise here, considering A, we have the nuts, B, we have a redraw to the 9 high straight if an 8 were to come, C, we have backdoor hearts working for us as well. There are some better free rolls that we could ask for. We could have 7-6-6-4 perhaps, or 4-7-8-9. So I don't know if it's mandatory to put in a raise here, and I decide on the flat call. In terms of 4 clubs, which we're not completely in love with, A, because it puts up a flush draw that we do not have, and B, we don't have the nuts anymore. We love it even less when my opponent leads out for full pot. We have the 7 high straight, which I'm not super eager to throw away exactly, but I'm definitely not loving it. We have seen this exact same opponent do some things in the previous hand though. So I'm going to make the call here and see what happens on the river. River gets even uglier. It brings in that backdoor flush draw, and we don't have any clubs in our hand. My opponent makes a bet. However, he's giving us kind of a reasonable price here. Granted, he might make this bet if he happens to have a weak to medium flush. Doesn't seem like he has the nuts here if he's choosing this sizing. It's not a polarized sizing. But again, we don't have any clubs in our hand. So I don't love it, but again, due to the fact that we've seen this player do some things in that previous hand, you know Andrew, curious Andrew, he's going to make the call here. And it's good news. My opponent flopped top 2 pair, turned a straight that we were actually beating, and then looks like he's probably bluffing on the river. He does have the 5 of clubs in his hand, so he's got some removal to some flushes here. Eventually, these guys are going to learn not to bluff me, though.
Very interesting. I love this hand. This is a very interesting hand. I love your flop analysis is literally exactly how I would have described it as well. Where pre-flop is fine.
Just channeling and hearing you talking about it.
No, dude, I love it. It's great to hear because it shows me that the way that you like, imagine that description from the first time we did a coaching session together, right? Like it's kind of night and day. So I'm a huge fan of it. Like mad props to you. This combination is very close between a call and a raise. As you said, the big blind here gets leads. And so for those of you that are kind of having trouble building a leading range, it's really hard. So don't worry about it. But the first thing to think about is on a specific board texture, do you ever have the nuts more often than the other people in the hand if you're out of position? And those are generally the boards you get to find leads on. So if the board's like 6-6 deuce or 3-5-6 rainbow or something like that, the big blind is going to have more 6x, like random 6x and random 4-7x than the other players who VPIP'd in position, generally speaking. And so they get to play a leading range. I don't think this person's thinking about GTO. their hand would not be a lead. You would only get to lead with, for example, the 7-4 combination, or 7-7, like 7-7-8 would be how you'd balance your leading range with a bluff here. You'd be leading 7-7-8. You also would be using a different sizing. What sizing did they use? They bet 30 out. We would never lead for this big. We'd always lead for like 1/3, generally speaking, out of position. I think I don't, multi-ways is weird. I'm pretty sure you size down. I haven't looked at the spot specifically. But getting back to you, this combination can do it can call or raise. And literally this, like, if you look this one up, it might even play as a mix where it would do both. Because if we have bear 7-4, we never raise. We have ace king 4-7, no backdoor draws. That's just going to play as a pure call, because there are so many, because we need to have some straights in our flatting range, because we're at a range disadvantage. When we're looking at the note of the game tree where big blind leads, they're going to have so much 7-4 that we don't get to play very many raises other than our like super nutted 7-4 combinations, or a hand like 7-7-8-9 with both backdoor flush draws is probably how we would mirror the straights that are a raise. But we don't have to think of that many bluffs because we don't have that many straights that are going to be raising for value. This combination is really on the cusp because we don't block any of the pairs, right? And so we don't block the 5, 6, or 3, so they can have all the sets, but they should really only be leading pocket sixes in theory land. And obviously this is like app game land, which is very different, as we saw from their combination. And so you could probably find a raise here, but I like the call with this specific combination. I specifically like, I like it even more because if the 4 or the 7 hits, our hand is not only not the nuts, but it's very likely to be not the nuts anymore, right? Where 7-8 is so likely, or 7-8-9 is super likely in our opponent's leading range as a bluff, that that if a 7 and a 4 come, we're really hating it. So the call here is fine.
A, we have the nuts.
Oops,
B, we have
just you saying the same thing. Like this turn is awful, absolutely awful, and especially when they hit it with the full pot sizing, it feels really bad. I think that against this particular opponent, as you said, if somebody has shown the proclivity to get out of line, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bluffing all the time. It might just mean that they don't know how to evaluate the relative hand strength that they have, right? Like they had deuce 6 here, the deuce 6 straight. And so they might just be clicking the pot button because they're trying to get value, or they're not sure what to do. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bluffing with this combination. It just might mean that they're confused. And a lot of the times when people are confused, they click the pot button or they click call. Or like the two main things people do when they're confused: click pot, click call.
That's
and
what
so
I do.
against so against an opponent who's maybe less likely to have some well thought out processes for approaching the hand, we can probably find a call here. If this is against like Solver Monkey Super Genius and they click pull pot on the turn here, you hate your life. Feels awful because they're as I said, their bluffs are going to be 7-7x, like 7-7-8. Is the best bluffing, or 7-7-9, or they're going to be really good bluffing hands to have on the flop here when they lead. And so because you have a 7 in your hand, it just makes it even more complicated. But against this type of opponent, I think clicking call is fine. And then when we get to the river, they bet like some really same thing on the turn. I actually like their sizing, which is funny. They play a third pot, like, or bet 33. Like this is a good sizing. Like if you have 7-8 with one club, it forces indifference from your combination. Right? Or if you have 7-7 one club, it forces the difference from your combination. You want to be able to bet your straights that have a club blocker. And the only way to do that is by betting this 1/3 pot sizing. And then you can rip it with, like, let's say you have like ace high flush, queen high flush, maybe some jack high flush type stuff. If you somehow backed into it, that can play a rip. But you want to be able to bet your non-nut straight. So this is actually a wonderful sizing, I think, on the river, and as I said, against Solver Human, this is going to be a fold with no club blockers.
You want to bet your non-nut straights usually?
No, you want to bet your nut straights blocking the flush.
Yeah.
So 7-8, sorry, I might have said it. 7-8 with one club, for example.
Got it.
We want to be able to be betting on the river for value here. But no, we're never betting like 7-4 for value here with a club blocker.
Yeah, I feel
that's
like
that's gonna play a check call.
I feel like population is massively checking even with the nut straight here with one club.
I 1000% agree. I think that they're almost. I think this is a spot where they're not playing the hand correctly, because remember the flush is the backdoor flush, right? So it's not like there's a flush on the flop. So this is one of, like, I'm going to quote Galfon from a decade ago. It's like when a scare card is not as much of a scare card, right? Yes, the flush exists, and so yes, that new hand class exists that beats our nut straight. but if we have the nut straight with one club blocker, it's pretty unlikely that our opponent's going to have backdoor to flush, especially with that one club. Like it is, I would guess that there's a massive difference between 7-8 no club, 7-8 one club in terms of betting frequency. If I were to run this spot, and same thing with you on the river when you're deciding whether or not to call. It's like 7-8. I guess 7-8 with no club and 7-8 one club are both call. It's like you're in indifference range. When I say indifference, chat, it just means that you don't really make any more money by calling or folding. It's kind of both the same. And if you can find that point where you put your opponent in indifference all the time, you win. Like that's what GTO means, is that no matter what your opponent does against you, they can't really make any money. And so if you're somebody who can find a difference a lot, you're going to make millions of dollars playing poker. But again, this particular spot against this sizing, with our combination, it's going to be a fold. But because this is someone, as you kind of said, that really is clicking buttons, you get to just click a button. Like you can flip a coin here, you can pick a RNG, you could just click call because you want to see it, right? Like if this is an action game and this is somebody who's more gambly, I'm okay clicking call as well, because they're just going to be clicking the pop button a ton anyways. But yeah, against, if it was me who was Wombat, like literally me you're playing against, and I played the hand in this way where I led flop, pot, turn, that 1/3 on the river, you're in a really bad spot with your combination. You probably need to find a fold.
Did you say what bluffs you might have here with this sizing?
What bluffs would I have? Yeah, 7-7-9 one club. So like
Okay.
like 7-7-8, 7-7-9 would also
Okay.
be a bluff that we'd have with this sizing. But I'm not gonna. It's hard. It's like really hard to find bluffs here. We could possibly try to, like, let's say we have 4, 5, 6, 7 one club. You can maybe find a 1/3 sizing with that combination, because you can force a lot of chops of, well, no, because you don't want to block the pairs, because those are the combinations that are. This is a good question. Like this is a spot where it's really hard for me to find natural bluffs. And so I'd have to, like, I don't have the immediate answer off the top of my head. I'd have to think about it more. But that's a really good question. Never asked it. Like, what are the bluffs here? Like the most natural one is 7-7, like your 7-7 blocker from the flop is going to go into your 1/3 sizing on the river.
Yeah,
But remember, we're also not going to have a lot of value bets on the river. Like, I think that's why I'm having trouble finding bluffs, is that we're not going to have a ton of like 1/3 pot value bets. I think if you checked your entire range, you wouldn't lose a lot of game value.
Mm-hmm.
But if you wanted to include some bets with like literally you could just play a 1/3 sizing where it's like 7-7 block and then 7-8 one, like 7-8 one club, and then have it be doing okay. Obviously, like you need to add some more combinations there to make it a more defined sizing. But I think the majority of the it's a weird run out. You probably have to, you have to bet a lot of 7/8s. Anyway, I'm rambling now. We can move on, but that was a really good question. Never asked it.
Next hand.
On the good old WSOP. All right, this is fun because I know every player you're playing against.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Down at the ace, queen, 9-8 double suited. Pretty nice hand here. We have an ace, 2 high flush draws. Let's 3-bet. My opponent makes the call, heads up to queen 7-6 with 2 clubs. Good news, bad news. We flop top pair, top kicker, plus an open and a straight draw, but we don't have any clubs. So I think checking makes a lot of sense here. I don't think betting is the worst, however, and that's what I go with. My opponent makes the call. Turns to 5 of clubs. We do make the straight, but unfortunately it's a 3rd club. I check it and my opponent checks it back. River pairs the 6. I'm going to check it again, just trying to get a showdown here with those 3 clubs on board. My opponent's not having it though. He puts out a bet. So pretty interesting spot here. It seems like there's several options on the table. Folding doesn't seem completely unreasonable since there's those 3 clubs as mentioned. Raising doesn't seem out of the question either. We do have a queen, which means we can represent a full house. Unlikely that he's going to have a full house since A, we blocked that hand, and B, he didn't raise on the flop. I'm just not really buying how many flushes he's trying to sell here. Considering the fact that he checked back on the turn and now is betting kind of a reasonable size here. And again, we're blocking full houses. I get a little curious here. I want to see what's happening. I'm going to make the call. Turns out he's got nada. Ship this one to the good guys and we're off to a good start here.
Cool. This is also a super fun hand. Lots of things to talk about. So this is a very standard 3-bet, just for anybody who's aware. Ace, queen, 8-9 double suited, very standard 3-bet. On this board texture, so this is what we call a dynamic unpaired board. And at Upswing in our course, we play this. So when you're creating solved solutions, you can pick as many sizes as you want, but generally speaking, it's us humans. We just want to have an easily repeatable strategy. And so on this board texture in a 3-bet pot, I'm going to have two ranges. I'm going to have a half pot range and a full pot range, or in a checking range, excuse me. So 3 separate ranges. This combination is actually really close to playing a check into check call, or even check raise. But it doesn't want to go into full pot because we have too much equity. You kind of want to play full pot on dynamic unpaired boards with hands that really want to only play over 2 streets. And so this combination is good enough that there's enough turn cards that come up, for example, a 5 or a 10, where a lot of our range is going to want to be checking. But this combination actually plays pretty well. Plays really well on those two turns. And so we lose a lot of the value of this combination by betting really big. A lot of players in 3-bet pots, when they have a hand like this, you just click full pot because they're kind of scared for different turn cards. But in poker, you really have to fight against those emotions of not wanting to lose and figure out the way to win the most, like to win the most money or to maximize your game value. So even if you might lose, quote unquote, at a higher percentage of the time, you are making more money in the long term by playing your hand effectively. So this combination can either go into a bet 1/2 or a check. I think both are probably fine. You decide to go with the 1/2 sizing. I'm down with that. Our opponent plays a call. Or did you? No, you went 3. No, you went 1/2. Perfect. Yeah, I like it. So 5 of clubs on the turn. Very, very easy check. We're actually checking a lot of our range here. We're either checking or we're betting 3/4 with the nutted portion of our range. But if I have every flush that's not the nut flush, and even the nut flush sometimes, because there are 3 straight flushes that exist. So I have the nut flush that doesn't block the straight flush. I'll check that at some frequency, but I'm checking a ton of my range because our opponent, when it's a 3-bet pot and then they call the half pot sizing, they just have a ton of flushes on this board, especially when we have a queen, an 8, and a 9 in our hand. Like those 3 cards make it so much more, like they don't have the straight jaw at as high of a frequency. They don't have 2 pair at as high of a frequency. They have either a hand like 6, 7, 8x or clubs, like very, very, very often. And so we shouldn't be betting this turn. Our opponent checks back, and you on the river said something about not buying that your opponent has a lot of flushes because they checked the turn. And that's where I disagree with the analysis. I think that we need to be checking back. For example, let's say I have like the jack high flush, no pair blocker. I check turn and my opponent check rips. Feels pretty bad.
Yeah,
or even if I had like queen high flush plus 2 pair and I bet and then get check ripped on, it doesn't feel very good. We're not going to get 2 streets of value from non-nut flushes here as in position. And so we'd much rather, like, because there's no draws that we need to fold out other than full house draws, which is not a thing we really think about. It's much easier to efficiently get money on the river with the non-nutted flush portion of our range. And then with the nut flush portion of our range, we bet turn, bet river to sizings that get all the money in, which is 3/4 turn, full pot on the river. And so that's the part of your river analysis that I disagreed with a little bit.
So we check back on the turn with, say, like a queen high or jack high flush because we don't want to get check raised on the turn.
Well, we check back with those combinations because we are never getting 2 streets of value from them, first off.
Yeah, so why do we bet the river rather than the turn?
Well, we need to protect our turn checking range because we don't always make a flush.
Okay.
So like let's say we have 8, 9 and we check back the turn. You need to have flushes in your turn range, and you need to have you have to have flushes in your turn betting range and your turn checking range just to be able to effectively bet the river with the appropriate amount of value.
Okay.
Both need to exist. And so on the turn, you're going to bet all your ace high flushes, some of your king high flushes that don't block pairs or straights. Like let's say we have king, jack, 10, 5 with clubs. That combination can play a bet as well because the king high flush plays pretty good. But the other reason why we don't bet our like medium flushes is because our opponent is supposed to check all their flushes that are non-nutted, but also still pretty good. So if our opponent turns the queen high flush or the king high flush, they're not going to be betting the turn either. So we're not value cutting ourselves in that spot.
Yeah.
And so when our opponent checks turn, checks river, now all of those non-nut flushes aren't really existent in our opponent's range. And so we can profitably play a bet with the flush on the river, because this is a really weird thing that happens in solver land, but it makes sense, I think, if you played a lot of poker, where if our opponent checks the turn, it doesn't mean they don't have a flush. It just means they don't have like the best flushes. But once they check the turn and the river, that conditional probability is so much lower than just checking the turn in terms of how many flushes they can possibly have, that it allows us to start value betting the non-nut flushes.
Okay.
Does that answer the question effectively for you?
Probably when I listen back to it 3 times.
Okay, I'm going to say it one more time really slowly. We don't, as the out of position player, bet our non-nut flushes, which means the in position player doesn't get to bet their non-nut flushes either, because the out of position player still has a lot of flushes in their range. So they cannot profitably bet non-nut flushes on the turn.
Got it.
They can bet their nut flushes and some second nut flushes if the second nut flush is unblocking the appropriate things like sets and straights. On the river, if our opponent checks to us again, now the probability of them having a flush is almost non-existent. They'll have some nut flushes if they're actually check raising, or they'll have some like 8 of clubs to high flushes that can play check raises on the river as a bluff, right? Because you're blocking the straight flush. That's some like voodoo stuff that shows up, especially really deep live. But because our opponent checked twice, now our flush is really, it has increased, it has increased in relative hand strength. Like even if the board texture doesn't change on the river, the relative hand strength of our flush goes up because the conditional probability of our opponent having a better hand when they check turn and river is very low. Wunderbar?
Sounds good.
Cool, awesome. All right, definitely watch it back. It's a weird spot. So on the river, this is, I think, what I would have checked ripped your hand instead of check calling it.
Yeah.
I think because we have to find bluffs on this river, and this is a really good hand to do it with. We block the nuts in terms of pocket queens. We don't have any clubs in our hand, and so remember, our opponent's checking back a lot of those middling flushes, right? And so they're going to want to value bet those middling flushes. We have to gate our opponent's aggression. We have to make sure that they can't value bet us too thinly by finding check raises. And this is one of those spots where it's like, oh, I have a hand that can be a bluff here. It's really hard to find bluffs here. I should probably bluff with this hand.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those spots where your hand, if it checks down, you win. But if they bet, very rarely will you have the best hand. So it's like a convertible in a draw, in Deuce 7 triple ball. Deuce 7 triple draw. If it goes check, check, our hand is value. But if our opponent bets, we're going to convert our hand into a bluff by check raising.
Nice.
Cool. Yeah. Sometimes you just call him like he played the hand like, okay, like it's not even that, the flop call is bad. But like he's trying to mirror his 9 high flush type stuff, but you should not, like 9 high flush is going to be too, even with the 5 blocker, is going to be too wide to be betting the river with, I think here. Anyway, next hand, moving on. Let's listen to your voice.
Go ahead and put in another 3-bet here. We don't really want to flat onto the small blind too much for A, rate considerations, and B, kind of sucks playing out of position. So I do put in the 3-bet, and my opponent calls once again. Flop comes king, queen, 4, 2 hearts. We have middle pair plus a flush draw. King high boards are definitely going to favor the pre-flop caller much more than the pre-flop 3-better. I check, and my opponent checks it back. Turns a brick. We have some showdown value here with the queen. I don't know if there's too much point in betting. I check it again, and this time my opponent bets. Again, we have second pair here. We have a flush draw, so I think it's okay to make a call here. River comes a 5. I check it, and my opponent is not done betting. He bets the full pot here, which is a pretty polarized sizing. He's essentially saying, I made a straight here. We don't have a ton of showdown value, but we do have ourselves a 3, which means we're blocking all those straights. This is going to be another pretty light call if we decide to make it, but it seems like we need to use the information that's available to us. We have the 3, we're blocking straights, and he's polarized here. So he's either going to have a straight or nothing. Once again, Curious Andrew, I'm going to make the call. What you got, buddy? Once again, they have nothing. Ship another one this way. All right.
I'm not going to evaluate this hand. I want you to evaluate this hand because I think that I'm going to know, like you're going to say what I'm going to say. So I want you, because this is like one of the first PLO sessions you played. Let's have you talk through this hand from pre-flop.
Well, it's something that like the comment about the king high boards is something that I am like at some point probably still am a little bit confused about because I know that like we're usually flatting kings pre-flop. So the comment about king high boards being better for the pre-flop caller rather than the 3-better is where this is derived from.
Got it.
So that's why I lean towards check.
Got it. Spots. So that's true in like under the gun versus button scenarios, but not button versus small blind.
Okay, because
we
there's
get
plenty of pocket kings that we can 3-bet from the small blind.
Yeah, exactly. Button's range is really wide, so we get to play a wider 3-betting range, and king does really well in that spot. So what you're saying is true in a different setup where it's like under the gun versus button.
Yeah.
Right. The button's going to have a lot of king in that spot, or cutoff is going to have a lot of king under the gun versus cutoff. So we don't get to play a lot of bets as the out of position player. Would you 3-bet this hand again? Is this a 3-bet pre?
So I actually a friend of mine ran this, and he said it's actually not a 3-bet. He said I can't remember. I guess it's just well, I don't know if he didn't run it in like the high rake environment. So again, I'm not sure what to do.
It's going to be a fold.
Yeah,
in a high rake environment.
Yeah, he said it was a flat, but then in the high rake environment.
Yep.
I guess
we hate the 3. 3 is awful. It's like one of those rules where so chat, Andrew and I are taking a couple things for granted. I'm going to just spell out loud. When you're in a high rake game, we don't get to play passively, because if we play passively pre-flop, we always see a flop and we always get raked. So if you're in a high rake game, which means any micro stakes game online, even through like 50 cent $1 1-2, which Andrew's playing here, still a high rake environment. And so you have to play hands that would maybe play a call if there was no rake, have to play a fold because of rake considerations. That's why Andrew, I think, chose to 3-bet this combination. But we really don't like 3-betting combinations that have low cards in them, like ace 3, 5, 7, or ace, even double suited is going to be a fold. We just really don't like cards below a 5. And so this combination, even though it looks really pretty, we have to find a fold. So now that we've kind of have talked through why you didn't c-bet this board, knowing that you have a decent amount of king, like let's say now you know that you can have c-bets on this board. Is this combination one of your c-bets?
To me, it seems pretty close. I guess I still might check it.
I think that's true too. I think that this is going to be really close, like on the border between betting and checking, because we want to have decently good hands in our check calling range.
Yeah. I
might rather check like ace queen, because ace queen is going to beat other like queen X combinations, like queen jack, that are like queen jack 10 type stuff that our opponent might bet. Having the 2-10s here is super weird, because our opponent is not going to have a lot of draws that they can continue with. Yeah. And so I'm probably playing a bet here just because it's like great when our opponent folds in this scenario. And we have hearts plus queen plus 2-10s. So it makes it really likely our opponent's going to find a fold in this scenario, which I'm really a fan of out of position with a mediocre hand. Like us betting and our opponent folding is the optimal outcome, I think, for this flop. But I do think that it's really, I do think that it's really close. And the 2-10s makes it play kind of weird. Queen, 10-3, double suited. So this is not queen, 10-3, drone it. This is queen, 10-10-3. Different combination. Isn't it irrelevant if it's a fold pre? It's like, yes, that's true, but we don't always play perfectly. This is something that I actually get asked a decent amount. It's like, well, if you made a mistake in the previous node or like in a previous street, why does it matter anymore? You're not playing perfectly. It's like, well, I'm a human and I make a lot of mistakes. We all make a lot of mistakes. And so what's important is that when we're in the middle of a hand and we're trying to navigate it, it's like, shit, I probably wasn't supposed to bet that flop. Well, now I'm here. I have now bet a combination that's not supposed to bet. That means that my range is wider than it's supposed to be in this situation. What is the response now that I'm supposed to have if my range was too wide in the previous node, right? So you can realize even mid-hand that you might have made a mistake, and on the fly do like node locking, or find what, like if you did make a mistake and you kind of were incorrectly approaching the hand, how would you now adjust knowing that you made the mistake that you made? And that, in my opinion, is a really important aspect to have as a professional poker player, especially one with some game theory knowledge in their back pocket, because we're not perfect. And we're going to, like, there have been so many hands where I'm like, shit, that wasn't a c-bet. All right, well, I'm here now. What do I do with this combination, given that I c-bet too wide? And then I navigate future streets with that information. And then even post hand, right? Because you can say, okay, well, I made the mistake on the flop. How should I have adjusted on the turn if I made that mistake on the flop or pre-flop or whatever it is? Because we're always going to make mistakes. And so it's good to try to do your best to navigate future streets, even if they're outside of the optimal game tree. And I think that's where a lot of the best players in the world do really well. One, they just very rarely make mistakes. And when they do make mistakes, they know in which direction they made that mistake. And so they can navigate appropriately in order to get out of the hand, minimizing the damage. Anyway, back to this hand. We check flop, they check back. Turns a 2, we check. I like this as well. It's like once we check the flop, I think checking turn here is really good. We just want to get to showdown or try to hit a flush. When our opponent bets on the turn here, our hand is pretty close to the top of range, and so I like that. I like the call on the turn, specifically when we check the flop, because it's going to be hard for us to show up with combinations here that are middling, and we need to protect that portion of our range. So we're going to find a call. I think that's completely fine. The river here is a hikey call, Andrew. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to ask. So you highlighted that the best reason to call, which you're correct about, is that we have a 3, right? Our opponent bet full pot. They're polarizing themselves. We have a 3. That's really good. What is bad about our hand in terms of calling? Like, why is our specific combination not a good combination to call with on the river?
We have hearts, and so we remove some of his bluffs.
Okay, that's exactly correct. What else? What other types of bluffs are we removing?
Straight draws as well.
Yep. So we're blocking their flush. So we're making it less likely that they have flush draws, and less likely they have missed straight draws.
Yeah.
So if we have ace queen, or that's the wrong one, like queen 3 9 even, because maybe because they can be turning worse queen x into bluff. I don't know. It's really hard to find calls here. With the, like it's really hard to find calls with this combination. Ace queen 6. There we go. Ace queen 6. So we don't have the straight, but we're still blocking the straight, and we have a queen. Like that might be the queen x that we can find a call with. It's like ace queen 6. But this combination, I think we just block so much of their missed draws with the 10 and the queen high flush draw. Because if they have jack 10x, they're going to be checking flop betting turn at a really high frequency. If they have a queen high flush draw, they're going to be checking flop betting turn at a decent frequency as well. And so there's just so much of our opponent's range that we block here that I probably wouldn't have found a call. With that being said, the 3 is pretty good. It's pretty good to have the 3. And so they're going to show up with some random BS sometimes, which happened here. So this is one of those spots where it's like, I think that we can, and this happens so often in PLOs, like you created a narrative for yourself. You're like, I'm a genius. This happens to me all the time. I play a hand. I'm like, oh, I thought about this hand perfectly. I'm a genius. And then I run it and I just got it wrong. Just like stone wrong. But I played it, but I still won the hand. But I played it just stone wrong. And that happens a lot in PLO. That happens so often in PLO because there's just so many things to think about. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, here we go.
Ship another one this way.
Ship another one.
All right, a few hands later, after giving myself a proper talking to, we have the rock in front of us, and we see a raise to $45 before looking down at King Jack 10-9 with a couple of hearts. Much better. I make the call, as does a limper. 3 ways to King Jack 8 with 2 spades. We find top 2 this time, plus a straight draw. The original raiser bets $90, and I decided to raise it up here to charge some draws. And looking back, I'm not exactly sure how to feel about this, as it might be a little high on the variance. We aren't super far ahead of a hand that has a combo draw that includes spades, but $350 it is. The other player folds, and the initial raiser calls. The turn is a brick, and my opponent checks. There's no going back now. I bet $800. My opponent thinks for about 4.5 seconds before making the call. It's extremely unlikely that we don't have the best hand at the moment, with the board being so draw heavy and only about $500 behind going into the river, but we're hoping for it to be a clean one. An offsuit queen falls, giving us a king high straight, but it leaves ace 10 as a possible hand that we could lose to. But when my opponent checks, and as mentioned, there's only another $500 behind, it seems too unlikely that my opponent wouldn't bet it himself if that were the case. Feeling like we're still good a lot of the time, I'm going to jam it in and go for the last $500 worth of value.
All in. All in.
This time my opponent takes a bit longer and wants a count. He doesn't seem thrilled, but he also doesn't want to throw it away getting these kinds of odds. Eventually, he does make the call, which is great news since we can't lose after he tanks, barring a slow roll. It's not a slow roll. We're scooping in a big one.
$5 back.
All right, this is a good hand to end on. I think we had the middle session where you're kind of just getting beaten up. It's nice to end on a winner, right?
So good to me.
It feels, yeah, same. So going back to the flop, and I actually think that's really the only note of this hand that's up for debate.
Yeah.
The flop raise here is close. I probably am playing it as a call because so first off, generally speaking, when someone they're not supposed to c-bet this board. That's just not like this is not a board they get to c-bet very often out of position. And so when they do c-bet it, they're going to have a stronger hand than we want them. They're going to have a stronger range than they normally would because they're supposed to check all their good hands, but now they're not checking them, they're c-betting them. And so their range is actually pretty strong when they bet here, especially on a board that even somebody who's not like a solver human can tell that this board is pretty good for a flat caller, right? Like the king jack 8 two-tone type of a board. And so they have a pretty strong range, which means we have to raise at a lower frequency. And this combination, even though it's top two pair with a straight draw, it's not that robust, right? Ace is a bad turn, queen is an indifferent turn, eight's a bad turn, 7 is a good turn, and then all spades are bad turns. And so this isn't like, if I have this combination with 2 spades, even if I have this combination with maybe 1 spade, like that might even be where the mix comes in. Or if I have this combination with the better straight draw with the queen 10 and not the 10-9.
Yeah.
That like queen 10 with 1 spade, for example, can probably play more raises. But this combination, it doesn't have the nut straight draw and it has no spade blockers. And so it's really hard for us to like raise flop and get a clean turn. You got the cleanest turn in the deck, right? Like the offsuit 6, but it's not going to happen as often as I think we need it to. Plus, we want to keep our opponent's range wider here. When they have a really strong range, you want their range to be as wide as we can make it. And by raising, we force interaction from the top of range. And the top of their range, when they have a stronger range that they're supposed to, is not very good. Even if we block the top sets, they can have the same hand with a better redraw. They can still have kings and jacks and stuff like that, though. And so you want, like, this is a general idea. It's like when your opponent has a stronger range than they're supposed to because they bet in a spot where they're supposed to check, I think that you're supposed to be like a good way to, in a game theory sense, interact with that is by keeping the range wider. Force interaction from like top and middle of range, but don't just force it from top of range because this is close to your top of range. His top of range is better than yours, which means we want the range to be wider. And so I think that that's the best explanation as to why we kind of want to play a call here.
Yeah, it's funny, like looking back at it and watching it unfold, and just like seeing myself put in the raise. I'm like, right away, I was like, I think I'd probably just call now, actually.
Yep. I mean, but I think this is I remember this session. This is like right after we had our first session together, I'm pretty sure. Almost immediately. And this isn't an awful raise, especially in the rock game at Aria, right? Because people are spewing. It's just one of those spots where the better you get at PLO, the more nuance comes into understanding the different ways to play king jack. Like not all king jacks are created equal. And I think nowadays you have much more of an understanding of the difference between like king queen jack 10 versus king jack 10-9 with no spades on this board texture, because you've seen more runouts and you can see how the board texture changes so quickly and how combinations that you felt were really strong aren't as strong as you thought they were because there are so many runouts that we don't love.
Sounds good to me, man.
Hell yeah, well played. Turn I think is a full pot. We just send it and then we also send the river. I think that's explanatory, self-explanatory.
Yep.
But yeah, let's keep it. Let's keep the freeze frame on just all the money just like being pushed towards you. Here we go. Nice. All right. Now your hand. Okay, chat. That's it for the play and explain section of our stream today. I have a couple questions that I'm going to pull from Instagram right now.
I do want to get my man Anand's
get some
question in there. He says I've almost always had winning sessions PLO live and almost always losing sessions online. Thoughts? I mean, online games are generally tougher than live games. So
for that, I think that's a really good first thought. You're going to get punished really hard online if you're a passive player. Whereas in a live game, you can kind of get away with it. And so without ever having seen you play, I would guess that you're probably not playing aggressively enough. And then you're playing mostly just to make good hands. And in live PLO, 8-handed, you can just sit there and make good hands and then bet. And people are not good enough to be able to find folds when they're supposed to. Like live PLO, a lot of people make mistakes by playing too wide. And so if you just sit there and play wide ranges, if you sit there playing tight ranges pre-flop, you're just going to be printing money against people that are bad. Alan says online games full of nits. That is strongly incorrect. I'm just gonna have to disagree with you. Online games are where you find like the crushers, people that play very, very, very aggressively. Like if you go sit in some of my games, if you go sit in some of my games, you're gonna see people playing really aggressively. And if you have a more passive style, the online games are very much going to be challenging for you. So I would recommend, if you're kind of having trouble with the online games, definitely get the PLO Launchpad. Make sure to click through Andrew's link so he gets that good affiliate click back. Because I think that learning how to play the game of PLO from the ground up, from a more aggressive perspective, is the way to introduce the online games. I got a question from Marin, aka my social media manager. He says, "Dylan, what's your Instagram?"
Excellent question. I'm going to link it. I'm going to link it.
Cool, thanks. Andrew's going to link it in the chat. Great question, Marin. Thanks for asking it. Jack asked, "Dylan, do you have an unpaid intern? Please sign me up." I don't have an unpaid internship. I'm hiring for a paid intern right now, but unfortunately, like, it's actually more time for me to have an unpaid intern versus a paid intern because I have to teach them more. So right now I don't have the bandwidth. I'm hoping in the future to be able to hire some more people so that if I have more time to kind of teach and mentor. But right now I pretty much only have time for people that already have have an understanding of the game. Let's go through some more questions that were asked on Instagram. We got a question from HSJ_95. So where can I pay for PLO opening range charts? So that question is, so there is no such thing as charts for PLO because there are hundreds of thousands of combinations. But on Upswing Poker, I'm going to just put it here in the chat, this link. We have what's called the PLO matrix, which is a real-time pre-flop solver, which I use off, like I don't use it while I'm playing, but I use it to study very often. It's the easiest way to get your pre-flop ranges down in PLO. I highly, highly recommend it. So Mitch says, should a well-studied but non-professional Hold'em player switch to PLO? And my answer to that is, how much fun do you have still playing Hold'em? And what are your goals? So if your goal is to just like have fun and you're bored with Hold'em, definitely switch. If your goal is to make a ton of money and study and put in a ton of work, I think being able to play both games well is really important. Like by getting good at PLO, it actually makes you better at Hold'em because you get deeper into game theory. And the games are different in that the ranges are all different, but the game theory is still the same. It's still like a pre-flop, flop, turn, and river game. And so when you get really good at one game, it actually makes you better at both, as long as you know how to kind of pick and choose what information to take. What else we got here? Yeah, know how to play, but don't know any place to start. I already talked about it. Andrew talked about it. The PLO Launchpad is your best bet. Nubis Hood asks, how do you handle the swings and adjust mentally to them? I would recommend going back to the start of this session that Andrew and I are doing together. We talk about mental game for about 15 minutes. I'm not going to reiterate all that here, but there's a ton of good information for you back there. And then I get this question a lot, which is, what do you consider a safe bankroll from transitioning to no limit Hold'em to PLO? And I'm sure you get this question a lot, Andrew, as well. It's like, how much money do I need to play X game? Yeah. And I'm not going to give an answer to that because that question is so specific to who you are, right? Like, what are your goals? Are you a professional poker player with no other income? It's like, you're going to need many more buy-ins for the games that you're playing versus somebody who's playing 15 hours a week as a recreational who is using it as supplementary income. And so for those of you that are really thinking, how much money am I supposed to have? I want you to ask the questions of how are you defining success? And if you're defining success as just like being able to beat the games for fun over your lifetime, but you have income, you're not a professional, then you need less buy-ins. Also, are you good at tilt management, right? If you're bad at managing your tilt, you need more buy-ins because you're going to start spewing and every buy-in is worth more. So it's very much it's an exercise in being honest with yourself, right? Because a lot of us want to be able to play bigger games, but generally speaking, and this is coming from someone who is a very aggressive bankroll manager, if we have an intuition that we want to move up really quickly, usually you want to be moving up a little bit slower. With that being said, the opposite is true in some cases where people are too needy with their bankroll. I've never been in this camp, but some people are too needy with their bankroll and are probably passing up on some good spots.
I was too nitty with my bankroll when I first played, when I first moved to Vegas, and I was playing like 1-3 for like several years, and then playing 2-5 for several years. I should have taken more shots.
Yep. I think that's you miss out on so much. You miss out on so much EV by being risk averse, like, and this is something that shows up so often in poker. It's like you're playing the game of poker, which means you're consenting to variance. The second you sit down at that poker table, you are now in the various ocean. You have no choice, right? And your job is either to let the waves crash over you and then get really mad when the ocean has big waves, or to learn how to surf, right? Like that's your choice. There's no in between. And so, whereas I think that it's good to be on the nittier side from your bankroll if you're a professional so that you don't have risk of ruin, I also think that you miss out not only on your current EV, but your future EV. Like if you put in a ton of work into your game and you're able to beat higher stakes, but you don't have the bankroll for it, you have to try to get to that stake in the quickest way possible while also minimizing your risk of ruin. See what else we got here. Will this be saved on your YouTube channel, Eric? Andrew? Ask Eric.
I think I'll leave it up for at least a little while.
Cool. Leave it up for a couple days. Maybe make some content out of it.
Yeah.
Cool. Got a question from Kyle of Man, and I was actually thinking about this today. Would love to know your thoughts on Galfon challenge and how he seemingly climbed back to the top quickly whilst coming from a non-solver based background. So first off, Phil Galfon is an absolute savage. It's just a truth of this world. It's been true since I was younger. He's my main competitor, literally, for coaching content. I'm very happy to say that he's just an absolute monster at PLO and at poker generally. He's a smart dude. There's something to be said about being able to play high stakes for years, be the best in the world, and then take a break, come back, and then relearn how to be the best in the world. The part about this that I think is incorrect is that he totally had help from solvers. I personally know one of his coaches is a very, very proficient solver-based poker player, like GTO-based poker player. And if you have that person on your staff, there's no way you're not going to get help from him. So I think that the Galfon is a savage, and he's really good at learning and good at executing. There's a lot of poker players that are really good at executing but bad at learning. A lot of poker players that are really good at learning and bad at executing, and not that many that are good at doing both. And if you could be one of those players, that's what I strive to be. I used to be a better player than studier. And so I put a lot of work into not only getting better at studying, but like living into my kind of like being able to play well game. If you can be that person that can study well and execute well, you're going to do really well. And Galfon is literally one of the goats in that.
So do you think he was essentially getting like solver summaries from that person that you mentioned?
Yeah. So what I remember this very vividly. When Galfon was doing his first challenge against Benny Vidi, I was watching it with Chris, and this is right as we were had just launched, we're about to launch our course. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at a lot of the stuff that he's doing. It's like, that's the wrong sizing, that's incorrect, that's the wrong sizing, that's incorrect. And literally by the second session, 3/4 of those leaks were fixed. Because if you have someone who's really good, they're just going to find those leaks right away and be like, hey, these are some massive gaps in your pre-flop play. And so those really big leaks are going to get shored up very, very quickly because they're easy to find. What's harder to find is like not finding enough aggression with your churn barreling frequencies. And that's actually the spots where Galfon's natural game was already pretty good. He was already good at finding bluffing candidates and finding the correct combinations to be value betting thinly with and stuff like that. And so whereas the areas that most players who study poker are going to have the most trouble with, Chris specifically, this is something he chatted with me about. One of his, like, it was really easy for him to get like the pre-flop stuff down, but it was hard for him to find aggression on later streets. Someone like Galfon, through his brain solver, without having ever studied GTO, and this is, I think, him and I, where our games were the most similar, is like, we are he specifically is very capable of finding aggression already on later streets. Mm-hmm. That's something hard to teach, right? It's really easy to teach, like, this was 2 wide of a 3-bet, this is the appropriate sizing on this board texture, right? I can print you out, like, this board texture, this sizing, this stack depth, this 3-bet sizing, these combinations. And that's very easy to look at pretty quickly, but it's hard to teach those later streets and how to effectively build ranges and find aggression.
Did you notice many changes in particular when he took like that 2-week break or whatever it was, then came back and then started his run?
I wasn't paying close attention at that point, to be frank. At the beginning, I was paying really close attention because I was like, hey, how good? Because I was thinking about taking on the challenge. So I was like, how good is he? Because I might be next. Because he offered like competitive coaches, which is pretty much me and Chris, 5-1. And so we're like, oh, do we take this challenge? And at the beginning, we're like, oh, this might be a good spot. And then he started getting better really quickly. And we're like, I don't know if I want to play Phil Galfon over 25,000 hands of poker. Like, I'm good, but I don't know. Like, I don't want to be brash, right? Like, even if I'm a favorite, he just might be able to execute better than me over 25,000 hands. Or he might be like, he's more used to playing 200, 400 for that amount of time than me. I've played those stakes, but not for as long as he had. Mm-hmm. So there's more that goes into like that. Plus it takes over your entire life, literally. Like you get no more life if you do that challenge. You wake up, work out, look at the sims from last night, work with your team, sit down, like meditate, stretch, eat, play poker for 4 hours, decompress, run the sims for the next day, wake up the next day, and you do that for whatever 4 months straight. And I like that's just a massive commitment if you're gonna battle at those levels. But yeah, so you probably won't see me in the Galfon challenge just because I don't want to dedicate my life to it. And he's just really, really good. Like I'm happy to say it's like I don't even know if I'm a favorite against Galfon, especially because my work in the past, like I've done a decent amount of heads up work, but I've also done a ton of work in 6max, and he almost only has been studying heads up.
Yeah.
And when you're a smart dude and you have a smart team, they're just going to get good.
It's just pretty interesting. Like it doesn't mean anything as far as like the courses that you have for you saying that, you know, like I was a Run It Once subscriber, like I don't know, a long time ago. And like I've watched Galfon videos talk, and I've listened to him talk about PLO, and obviously he's a super smart dude. Like it doesn't require me saying that, but it's just like his videos just like never clicked with me, and I never like got better at PLO after watching his videos, and I never like gravitated towards him. He's like probably my favorite person in the entire industry, in the entire poker industry.
He's such a good dude.
But you know, one person's videos are going to click with somebody, and some other people are going to click with other videos.
Totally. And I think that's especially true nowadays, right? Where we're all using the solver, right? It's not about getting the correct information anymore. It's about getting the correct information, which is publicly available, and it's not hard to run your own sims and do it correctly. But then it's about conveying that information. And that's like one of my favorite things about coaching is that it doesn't matter that I have the answers. It matters that the person that I'm talking to or the people that I'm teaching matters that they can understand it. And that's where I really try to hone in with my content and material. It's not just like, I might not teach, well, in some of my stuff, it's really advanced, but I'm not doing like all the gnarly deep dive stuff. I'm just like trying to get as many people as possible to be able to understand the fundamentals and go have fun, right? Because it's not fun if you go play PLO and you're confused, you don't know how to think about the game, right? It's more fun if you know what to be thinking about. And I think that's another misconception people have. It's like, oh, everyone's just going to get nitty when they get good. That's true pre-flop, but if you sit at a game in post-flop and everyone's good, it's just raises, 3-bets, check raising the entire time. Everyone's trying to restrain each other's aggression. So the games get more fun in a lot of spots if everyone's good. But that's my opinion.
What about in tournaments? Somebody asked a question about antes, but what's interesting is there usually aren't antes in PLO tournaments, right?
Mm-hmm. There are at the Aria, which is why I like the Aria tournaments the most.
Oh, there are. Interesting.
Yeah. That's why I like the Aria tournaments.
Matt says, how do antes affect your opening ranges and sizing in PLO tournaments? Open wider and bigger?
So it's so hard to get the correct answer for PLO tournaments. This is one of my current projects that I'm working on because we don't have any good tools for doing ICM with PLO other than at final tables. And so a lot of what we have to do is just look at the stack depths for like 10 BB, 20 BB, 30 BB, 40 BB with no ICM accounted for, and then look at what we're supposed to do. And actually what shows up in a lot of spots is that the best sizing is just full pot, even at like 10 bigs, 20 bigs, 30 bigs, 40 bigs. In those ranges, you just play a full pot, especially with antes, because if there is an ante, it's never counted in the pre-flop raise. That's the way that it's played if there is a pre-flop ante. So the answer is that it affects it. It does affect it because you have to VPIP more. Whenever there's antes, you have to play a higher VPIP. That's the way the math checks out. But your sizings don't really change because what we've found is the best sizing is just like to be raising the full pot. And you can adjust this. Like I definitely use non-full pot sizings in spots where I know I'm supposed to in tournaments because people are just like not continuing at the frequency they're supposed to. So you can like, there's a lot, I can't get that information away publicly because I'm playing all like I'm playing all the big stuff this summer. And right. I already have been playing it. So I'm like, but yeah, moving into the series, I can't really talk about that publicly, but yeah, generally speaking, and this, I'm fine saying this publicly because I literally have it in like in the PLO matrix, like a pre-flop pot sizing is fine generally, but you can adjust it and make more game value.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like I don't see too many people like opening for pot in PLO tournaments, but not that means anything.
I'm going to tell you and your viewers something about PLO tournaments, Andrew. Everyone is awful.
Yeah.
Everyone. It's like, if you want to come to the World Series of Poker and find really high EV spots, get good at PLO, show up and play every PLO tournament. Especially like I play literally like whatever the biggest buy-ins that exist. I play those and I'm shocked. Because in those, there are people that are better than me. And like you get a couple like the absolute massive crushers that show up to the 25Ks and stuff. But there's a lot of people that don't play PLO. They're Hold'em tournament players that just want to play a 25K because it's a good shot at a bracelet. And it's like even the 10Ks at Aria are not that tough. Like there are good players in that, but they're, in my opinion, not that tough. But with that being said, they're good players, and I don't want to like talk smack on everybody. It's just that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in PLO, specifically in the live realm, and specifically on tournaments, because it's so hard to get the right answers for PLO tournaments.
Okay. You want to
Cool.
find any more questions?
That's it that I had prepared. Let me just do one more quick check. Chat, I'll sit here for 5 minutes and answer your questions. And then we're going to let Andrew get a nap and me get a nap because I think we both need a nap. Yeah.
I think this is a cool way to do it, though. I like the both the variety of the live and online hands, and the having it the vlogged hands. I think makes a lot of sense for these streams on my channel. This
was perfect. I think if we like as we do this moving forward, this was the perfect dynamic, because it also allows you to see yourself grow over time, right? Like you can see how your thought process even gotten better, because we hear you talk about it and then you're like, I disagree with myself. And I do that. There's so many, like I've looked back at some of the past things I made and be like, I disagree with myself. Like,
yeah, it's pretty funny.
It's beautiful though. Like that's such a good thing, right? There's this feeling in poker where it's like, we don't want to be wrong, right? And the answer is like, no, you want to be wrong because then you found it. Now you got better. Like it's a very egoless pursuit.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Levi asks, best exploits for PLO Live 1-2. Play tight, play hands that make the nuts, win money. It's very, like, I say it's very easy, and it's actually not that hard. Like, play hands that can make the nuts, play tight, make the nuts, win money against people. PLO 5 card, I don't like. I just don't like 5 card. You have to play tighter because ranges are so symmetrical. So it's like, out of position, never gets to bet, very rarely gets to lead. In position, always gets to play a lot of aggression. The games just play really tight. I don't like 5 card. And then what else we got? How many people are truly practicing and setting PLO MTTs opposed to investing heavily elsewhere? I know of a couple of the best players in the world that are doing it because I know them. But generally speaking, I've seen no good PLO tournament content. And I specifically haven't made PLO tournament content. One, because I don't want to put it out. But two, it's like, it's just hard to get really good answers. I did make so let me rephrase that. I made one piece of PLO tournament content that I'm comfortable putting out. It's in the advanced course and it's fire. It's Chris and I going through a fully solved one. It's me talking about PLO MTTs generally, like what are the general adjustments that you're supposed to make. But then there's an entire video of a full final table, 25K final table that we ran in Munker, and it's just epic. It is so good. Like it's Chris sitting there who's never studied PLO MTTs ever or MTTs ever, and then him just being like, "Wow, I would have never expected that." This is one of the best players in the world. And like both of us are being like, "This is crazy," and that was like, it's just so much value. And I doubt there are a lot of people doing that.
So where's that video?
That's in the advanced PLO mastery course.
Okay, that's so in like a play and explain type of a thing.
It's in its own section in the centralized spotlights. I did, I think, 2.5 hours of PLO MTT videos in there. And if you want an intro to PLO MTTs in the PLO Launchpad, I did a session with Pav. That was too good. It was a session, like a coaching session like this, but it was too good that we had to make people pay for it. So we put it in the course.
There's also videos of me and you playing Heads Up.
Oh yeah. Those are great videos. If you want to watch me and Andrew playing Heads Up, totally, like, that was live on stream. Those are phenomenal videos. Definitely go watch those in the Launchpad, because then we reviewed them together and then put them in the course. What else we got? Yedog asks, when will there be a PLO meetup game with Dylan? I'm not sure. Maybe one of these days. Andrew and I were kind of chatting about it.
You got to figure it out.
Yeah, can figure it out. Joan, do you ever play No Limit or specifically PLO? I play No Limit. I try to be as good as I can at both games, but I'm not sitting like, that's not true actually. I'll sit some bigger No Limit games online, but never if there's crushers in the game. I'm okay at Hold'em. I'm not great at it. And I have friends who are like the best in the world at it, and I'm not as good as them, but I get to ask them questions, and that's pretty cool.
Who do you look up to in the poker industry?
What do I look up to? That's a great question. I definitely looked up to Chris a lot, the person who I made the course with. I would say that he was my like, I never would really like when I was younger, Galfond was the person that I emulated a lot. I looked up to him for a long time. And then in my current iteration, Chris was my biggest influence. He was the first real one-on-one coach I ever had. And he literally taught me GTO. It's like, hey, there's this thing, it exists. This is how it works. And he transformed me into like a pretty good brain solving player who played aggressive to somebody who actually was good at poker. So Chris is, and I also just really respected his approach to poker. It was very consistent, which is something that in my life I've always struggled with, where it's like you wake up, you stretch, you look at the Sims, you play, you go out, you eat, you hang out with your friends, you come back, you play again, hang out with your partner, make dinner, go to sleep, wake up, do it again. And then you just can continue to do that. And that amount of consistency is something that I really, really respect. I think that everyone should look up to Lucky Chewy is my answer to that question, because Chewy is just like the straight up GOAT. Not only is he the GOAT when it comes to how he approaches poker in terms of his rigorousness and his approach to the game, but his worldview and his mindset is just so, it's just epic. Like he just truly feels at peace in this world. And I have an immense amount of respect for that. It's so hard to be able to get there. And Chewy is like someone who I feel very fortunate to be able to call a friend and someone who I really look up to as well.
Yeah, I haven't been able to spend enough time as I need to with Chewy. I've only chatted with him like a couple times and pretty briefly. So
yeah,
I need more time.
We all do. That's the truth of this world. We all need more Chewy time.
All right. Want to wrap it up here?
I'm just looking to see if there's any more. That seems like we're good. Andrew, as always, thank you for having me. I appreciate you. It's super fun.
Dylan, you're the best. Thanks so much for all the knowledge. It seems like everyone who tuned in agrees, thought it was dope. So let's do it again. Maybe if we aim for like once a month or something like that, it'll give me time to make some more content here, and then we can come back and review it.
Yep, that's a perfect frequency. Definitely, if you have questions, hit me up on Instagram, hit me up on Twitter. I stream on Twitch at, I'll write it in here, twitch.tv/cookies1. I generally, like right now, I'm streaming less because I'm not in Las Vegas, but I tend to stream 1 to 3 times a week, usually in this time slot, Monday at 5 p.m. Andrew was nice enough to help me out because I wasn't in town.
So it's twitch.tv/cookies1.
Yep, it's in the chat right now.
For some reason, it's not showing up for me. I don't know if it's because it's a link or something or what, but
it's possible here. CO0KIES. CO0KIES. Twitch.tv/cookies1. Cool. Definitely. Yeah. If you want more free PLO advice, it's not going to be like this. My streams are not like, I definitely talk through stuff. This is more equivalent to a coaching session. So if you were to pay me to do coaching, that's kind of what you're getting a view into here. The sessions from on my Twitch stream are like you watching me play while my opponents are also watching me play. So it's a little less information given away. But yeah, anyway, this is super, super fun. Chat, you're awesome. Thank you for having good questions, being kind to each other, all those good things.
All right, Dylan. Thanks so much, man. We will do it again, hopefully before too long.
Yep. Later, friends. Peace.
Take care, buddy.